Hey there, tonight we're uncovering how Egyptian builders survived the grueling task of tomb construction. Not the fairy tale version, you know, but a world where ingenuity met survival amidst the sands of time. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. In the sizzling sun of ancient Egypt, where the desert sand feels as if it's about to catch fire, you find yourself in the middle of an extraordinary operation. No, it's not a divine intervention or magic scrolls being unfurled. This is the realm of logistics, grit, and sheer human persistence. You're part of a workforce tasked with constructing one of the mighty tombs that will echo through the ages. Forget the idea of a handful of slaves toiling under the crack of a whip. This is the ancient version of a bustling construction site, with a workforce assembled with precision and purpose. So, how does one whip up a workforce capable of building a monument that can stand the test of time, and then some? Let's dig into the nitty-gritty, because the pharaohs weren't exactly hiring from LinkedIn. First up, you've got a mix of skilled artisans, stonemasons, carpenters, metal workers. These guys are the rock stars of the ancient world, literally shaping the future. Then there are the laborers, often farmers drafted during the agricultural off-season. Think of it as a seasonal gig, except instead of flipping burgers, you're hauling massive stone blocks that weigh more than an SUV. Now, we're talking about a project that requires thousands of workers. No small feat in a world without email chains or project management software. The organization was as intricate as the hieroglyphs that would eventually adorn the walls. Crews were organized into teams, each with specific tasks, and were managed by overseers who reported to higher-ups. This hierarchy was crucial to keep things running smoothly. Can you imagine the chaos if everyone just showed up and decided to wing it? The pharaohs didn't want a pyramid resembling a sandcastle after a tide. Life on the construction site was a blend of hard work and daily routines. You'd think that with all this backbreaking labor, life would be grim, but surprisingly, the conditions weren't as dire as you might expect. Workers were compensated not with gold, but with essentials like grain, beer, and fish. Beer was a staple, and it's not just because the ancient Egyptians liked to party. It was nutritious, safe to drink, and basically the ancient equivalent of a sports drink, minus the electrolytes. Picture a Gatorade ad, but with guys in kilts and sandals. Let's bust a myth while we're at it. The notion of slave labor building the pyramids is more Hollywood than history. Evidence from tomb sites, like the workers' village near the Giza Plateau, suggests these laborers were well fed, housed in modest but sturdy dwellings, and even received medical care. Archaeologists have unearthed remains showing healed bones, which indicates that workers were cared for and healed before returning to work. This isn't exactly the image of a cruel, whip-cracking overseer that's been popularized over the years. The social and political context of the time also played a huge role in this massive endeavor. The pharaoh was seen as a guard king, and working on his tomb was considered a service to the divine. In this theocratic society, the construction of these grand tombs wasn't just a job. It was a spiritual duty, a way to ensure eternal life for the pharaoh, and by extension, prosperity for the nation. Talk about a pressure-packed job description. As you're hauling yet another limestone block, perhaps you ponder the irony. Here you are, an ordinary worker, contributing to a monument that will outlive not only you, but generations to come. It's a curious blend of anonymity and immortality. Your name might not be carved into the stones, but your sweat, your labor, and your daily grind are what turn these colossal dreams into reality. And let's not forget the environmental factors. Working in the blistering heat of the Egyptian desert is no small task. The Nile River was the lifeline, not just for agriculture, but for the logistics of construction. The annual flooding was both a blessing and a curse. It deposited fertile soil for crops, but also dictated the seasons of labor. When the river was at its peak, farmers were free to join the ranks of laborers, transforming the landscape through sheer human will and an impressive feat of ancient project management. As you stand amidst the dust and noise, you're part of a well-oiled machine that speaks to the ingenuity and resilience of a civilization that knew how to wield power and build legacies. These tombs aren't just stone and mortar. They're the embodiment of a nation's ambition, its spirituality, and its capacity to rally thousands to a cause greater than themselves. And as you wipe the sweat from your brow, you might just pause to appreciate the enormity of what you're part of, a testament to human endeavor that will echo through the millennia. As you pause to wipe the sweat from your brow, you can't help but marvel at the scene unfolding around you, a living, breathing symphony of manpower and meticulous precision in the heart of the desert. Welcome to the construction process itself, where every chisel strike and every heave of stone is a testament to human ingenuity and sheer tenacity. Forget the romanticized image of mystical forces or alien architects. This is all about the gritty reality of ancient engineering. Let's kick things off with a little trip down the Nile, the arterial highway of ancient Egypt. The limestone blocks you and your fellow laborers are wrestling with originate from Tura, a quarry famous for producing stone so smooth and fine, it's practically the silk of the rock world. These blocks don't just materialize at the construction site by magic. Nope, they make their journey on the Nile, the OG conveyor belt, transported on boats during the inundation period when the river is at its fullest. Talk about a logistical nightmare. Imagine coordinating thousands of tons of stone without Google Maps or a shipping app. Once the blocks reach the site, it's all about precision. You see, the ancients weren't just stacking rocks and hoping for the best. The builders had a penchant for geometry that would make Pythagoras proud. They used tools that might seem laughably primitive to us today. Wooden mallets, copper chisels, measuring ropes, but these were the cutting-edge tech of the time. The copper chisels, for instance, were crafted with such care that they could carve through limestone like a hot knife through butter. Okay, maybe not quite like that, but you get the picture. Now, let's debunk a myth that's been floating around pop culture like a persistent bad penny: aliens. Yes, those extraterrestrial architects supposedly swooping in with their advanced tech to help the Egyptians out. It's a fun narrative, but the truth is, humans were more than capable of pulling off these architectural feats. They had something even better than alien tech. They had ingenuity, organization, and a deep understanding of their materials and environment. Plus, if aliens were involved, you'd think they'd have left behind something more interesting than rock piles, like a space laser, or at least a how-to manual. But back to the tools of the trade. The process of shaping these stones was an art form in itself. Workers used dolerite, a hard, igneous rock, to pound the limestone surfaces smooth. It was labor-intensive and required a keen eye for detail. This wasn't just grunt work, it was craftsmanship, a skill honed over years of practice. The precision with which these stones were cut and placed is evident in the fact that many of these structures have withstood the test of time and nature. Let's talk numbers for a moment. Some of these blocks weighed up to 5 tons each. That's about the weight of a fully grown hippo, and hippos aren't exactly known for being easy to move. But these workers found a way. They employed sledges and ramps, lubricating the sand with water to reduce friction. Ingenious, right? It's a clever workaround that'd make even a modern physicist nod in approval. While we're busting myths, let's address the labor force. The Hollywood image of thousands of slaves enduring endless torment is a far cry from reality. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence suggesting that the laborers were well-organized teams of paid workers, many of whom took pride in their work. There were entire communities built around the construction sites, complete with bakeries, breweries, and medical facilities. This wasn't just a job. It was a community effort, a national project that brought people together in a shared purpose. The economic implications were also significant. This wasn't just about building a tomb. It was about stimulating the economy, providing jobs, and redistributing wealth. The state funded these massive projects, which in turn supported a wide array of industries, from quarrying to transportation to food production. It was a well-oiled machine of supply and demand, ancient Egypt's own form of Keynesian economics, if you will. Now, you might wonder, what drove these artisans to such precision and dedication? It's not just about a paycheck. There was a cultural and spiritual motivation. Constructing these monumental tombs wasn't merely an architectural challenge. It was a sacred duty. The pharaoh was seen as a living god, and ensuring his safe passage to the afterlife was a matter of national importance. This was about securing divine favor and perhaps a little slice of immortality for oneself. So, as you heave another block into place, consider the bigger picture. You're not just participating in a construction project. You're part of a grand narrative that weaves together economics, culture, and technology. The stones you place today will become the history that future generations study and marvel at. And while aliens and slaves make for captivating tales, the reality is that the true story is even more compelling, a testament to human capability and the relentless pursuit of excellence. As the sun sets over the desert, casting long shadows over the site, you might find yourself reflecting on the day's work. You're not just moving stones, you're moving history, one block at a time. It's a reminder that while myths may capture our imagination, the truth is what ultimately endures. And as you prepare for another day of hard, honest work, you can take pride in knowing that your efforts are laying the foundation for a legacy that will outlast the sands of time. As the desert's sky dims and the last echoes of hammers fade, the hustle of the workers' villages comes alive, a world apart from the grandeur of tombs, yet equally intriguing. Here, camaraderie and hierarchy blend in a daily dance as intricate as the hieroglyphs they etched in stone. Forget what you've seen in movies about grim, joyless camps. These villages were buzzing with activity, and not just because of the beer rations. Picture a village like Deir el-Medina, the company town of ancient Egypt, if you will. Built to house the artisans who crafted the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, this place was a hive of social dynamics. Around 60 families lived here, each dwelling a testament to the modest yet structured lives of the workers. These homes weren't palatial, but they were sturdy, designed for comfort and practicality, with space for storage, sleeping, and even a small courtyard. Think of it as the ancient version of a suburban cul-de-sac, minus the HOA fees. Now, let's talk hierarchy. This wasn't a free-for-all where anyone could claim the title of master builder. Workers were organized under a foreman who reported to higher-ups, creating a chain of command that ensured the right tomb ended up in the right place. It's the same principle as not letting the intern handle the nuclear codes. The foreman was like the village mayor, wielding authority and settling disputes, ensuring that everything from work schedules to grain distribution was fair and orderly. The ancient Egyptians understood the power of good management long before anyone uttered the phrase corporate culture. And speaking of culture, women played a more significant role than you might expect. While their husbands were busy chiseling history into stone, women were the backbone of the community. They managed households, raised children, and even engaged in trade and crafts. Some were even literate, participating actively in community affairs. They might not have been swinging hammers, but they were undoubtedly the mortar holding the village together. In this community, religion wasn't just a weekend affair. It was the very fabric of daily life. The workers believed that their labor was a sacred duty, a path to divine favor. Shrines and temples were scattered throughout the village, offering places for prayer and reflection. Workers would leave offerings in hopes of securing protection from the guards, a practice that underscores the spiritual significance of their work. Imagine clocking out from a long day at the construction site and heading to the local shrine to thank the guards for not dropping a 2-ton block on your foot. Now, let's stir the pot with a bit of myth-busting. You've probably heard about the harsh, exploitative conditions of ancient labor. While it's true that the work was grueling, it's misleading to paint it as entirely oppressive. Workers were compensated with rations of grain, beer, and fish, a diet fit for an Olympian in a loincloth. Moreover, they had access to medical care, and records show that requests for time off to heal or rest were often granted. It's almost like they had an ancient version of sick leave, proving that even back then, a healthy worker was a productive worker. The concept of a labor union might seem modern, but the workers at Deir el-Medina had their own version. In times of dispute, they didn't just grumble over their pints of beer. They organized strikes. Yes, strikes. The most famous occurred during the reign of Ramses Roman III, when workers halted their chisels because they hadn't received their rations. It was a bold move, and it worked. The pharaoh's officials scrambled to meet their demands, showing that even in ancient times, a united workforce was a force to be reckoned with. So, what's the takeaway here? The workers' villages were not just extensions of the construction sites. They were living communities with their own rhythms and rules. They were microcosms of the larger society, reflecting the values, challenges, and triumphs of their time. The romantic image of noble laborers toiling for a divinely ordained king is seductive, but the reality was a complex tapestry of human endeavor, not devoid of hardship, but rich in purpose. As the stars twinkle over the Nile, these villages hum with the sounds of life, laughter, debates, and the occasional argument over who forgot to pick up the grain. It's a reminder that while pyramids and tombs may capture our imagination, it's the stories of the people who built them that truly endure. So, as you find yourself pondering the social fabric of ancient Egypt, remember that beyond the stones and hieroglyphs lies a world of human stories just waiting to be told. As the stars twinkle over the Nile, these villages hum with the sounds of life, laughter, debates, and the occasional argument over who forgot to pick up the grain. But let's not get lost in the melodrama of ancient soap operas. We're here to follow the money, unravel the power plays, and dive headfirst into the economic and political incentives that turned Egypt into a land of tombs and temples. So, let's talk about the cash, or rather, the grain and beer, which were practically as good as gold back then. The construction of these monumental tombs wasn't just an architectural flex or a spiritual endeavor. It was an economic juggernaut, a stimulus package that would make modern economists drool. Funded by the state, these projects funneled resources and wealth across the empire, generating jobs for thousands. If you were in the business of quarrying, transportation, or food production, you were in luck. The pharaoh's building spree kept your pockets, or rather your granaries, full. But this wasn't a charity exercise. It was all about power. The pharaohs were playing a high-stakes game of political chess, and each stone block was a move on the board. By commissioning these grandiose projects, they were flexing their divine muscles, asserting their god-king status, and cementing the social hierarchy. It was a not-so-subtle reminder to everyone that the pharaoh was the linchpin of cosmic order. Mess with him, and you're not just risking a slap on the wrist, you're toying with the universe itself. And let's not forget the bureaucrats, those behind-the-scenes puppet masters. They were the ones orchestrating this symphony of stone and sweat. The Grand Vizier, essentially the pharaoh's right-hand man, was the CEO of Egypt Inc., overseeing everything from tax collection to labor distribution. Imagine the paperwork, or rather, the papyrus work. This was a world where efficiency and organization weren't just buzzwords. They were the difference between chaos and a well-oiled machine. Now, here's where it gets juicy. While the official narrative was all about serving the divine, there was a healthy dose of good old-fashioned self-interest at play. The elite, those with the means and connections, profited handsomely from these projects. They controlled the flow of resources, ensuring that their coffers were always full. And in a society where wealth and power were as intertwined as the reeds of the Nile, this was the ultimate status symbol. But what about the common folk, the ones actually moving these stones? Did they see any of this wealth trickle down? Well, yes and no. While they didn't walk away with sacks of gold, they did enjoy some perks. Steady work meant regular rations and a sense of purpose. In a world where survival was a daily grind, this was no small feat. Plus, there was always the hope that serving the pharaoh might earn them a place in the afterlife, a cosmic 400 one. K, if you will. Now, let's tackle a myth that's more stubborn than a cat refusing to be herded. The idea that these grand projects were solely for the pharaoh's glory misses the bigger picture. Yes, they were tombs, but they were also economic engines, driving growth and innovation. The ripple effects were felt across the land, from bustling markets to quiet farming villages. It was a delicate balance of power and prosperity, with the pharaoh at the helm, steering the ship through the sands of time. And speaking of time, let's pause to appreciate the sheer scale of these endeavors. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, took about 20 years to complete. That's 2 decades of relentless labor, resource management, and logistical wizardry. It wasn't just a monument. It was a testament to what humanity could achieve when driven by a mix of ambition, faith, and let's be honest, a touch of vanity. But who really benefited from these colossal endeavors? Was it the pharaoh, whose name would echo through eternity? Or the workers, who found meaning and livelihood in the shadow of these mighty structures? Perhaps it was the elite, who leveraged these projects to consolidate power and influence. The truth is, it was all of the above, each playing their part in this ancient epic of human endeavor. So, as you stand amidst the ruins of time, pondering the legacy of these grand constructions, remember that they are more than just tombs. They are chapters in a story of power and perseverance, a testament to the complex dance of economics and politics that has been playing out since the dawn of civilization. And as the sun sets on another day, casting long shadows over the desert, you might find yourself wondering who the real beneficiaries of history are, the names etched in stone, or the countless souls who labored in their shadow, leaving behind a legacy of their own. And so, as the dust settles on these monumental tombs and the echoes of ancient chisels fade into the annals of history, let's talk legacy. What do these colossal monuments mean for us now, standing as they do, defying the passage of time like stone sentinels of an enigmatic past? They continue to inspire awe, ignite curiosity, and evoke endless speculation. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for example, remains the only surviving wonder of the ancient world, an architectural marvel, a testament to human ingenuity, and let's be honest, the ultimate flex of pharaonic power. These structures are more than just pyramids and tombs. They are the embodiment of a civilization that knew how to dream big, to harness the collective power of its people, and to leave a legacy that would echo through the ages. They remind us that in a world without cranes or concrete mixers, humans were capable of extraordinary feats. It's a humbling thought, really, to consider that with nothing more than copper tools and sheer determination, the ancient Egyptians crafted monuments that have outlasted empires. And while we're reflecting, let's not gloss over the sweat and labor that made it all possible. The workers' villages, the bustling communities with their own rhythms and hierarchies, are a testament to the social fabric that supported these monumental endeavors. These were the unsung heroes, the ordinary men and women whose daily grind was the engine of history. Their story is as integral to the legacy of these structures as the pharaohs they were built for. But what about the myths that cling to these ancient stones like stubborn desert dust? The idea that aliens might have lent a hand, or that slaves were driven to their deaths under the cracking whip. These narratives persist, fueled by a mix of Hollywood flair and our insatiable thirst for mystery. Yet, the truth, as always, is far more fascinating. It's a story of human effort, of organized labor in a pre-industrial society, and of a people who found purpose and pride in their work. If we zoom out a little, the economic and political implications of these building projects ripple through history. They were more than just tombs. They were epicenters of an economic boom, driving trade and innovation across the ancient world. In a way, they were the ultimate public works projects, a pharaonic version of the New Deal, if you will. The resources and labor they absorbed were immense, but so too were the benefits that spread across Egyptian society, from the elite to the everyday worker. And what about their influence on future generations? Well, the echoes of these ancient builders can be heard in the foundations of our own cities. The principles of organization, resource management, and political manipulation that underpin these projects are as relevant today as they were then. Think of any major modern infrastructure project, and you'll find traces of the same challenges faced by those ancient Egyptians, albeit with a bit more paperwork and fewer copper chisels. In a broader sense, these structures challenge us to think about our own legacies. What will we leave behind for future generations? Will our skyscrapers and bridges stand the test of time, or will they crumble into dust, leaving only stories and myths in their wake? It's a question that tugs at the heart of human endeavor, urging us to consider not just the physical monuments we build, but the societal ones as well. As we wrap up this journey through the sands of time, let's tip our hats to the myths, even as we embrace the realities. The romantic narratives of mystical forces and divine kings are alluring, but it's the truth of human capability, organization, and resilience that truly captivates. These ancient builders, with their sweat and skill, created more than just tombs. They crafted legacies that continue to inspire and challenge us. So, next time you gaze upon the pyramids, perhaps from the comfort of your couch in a documentary binge, or, if you're lucky, in person under the baking Egyptian sun, remember the stories etched in every stone. The tales of ambition, labor, and innovation, of a civilization that dared to dream big and build even bigger. And as the sun sets on this chapter of history, casting long shadows over the desert, we are reminded that while myths may endure, it's the truths of human endeavor that ultimately stand the test of time. You're standing in the midst of a bustling crowd, the kind that makes you wonder if ancient Greek deodorant was ever a thing. It's the annual pilgrimage to Eleusis, and you're not alone. Thousands have flocked here, drawn by the irresistible magnetism of the Eleusinian mysteries. Now, why would anyone endure the sweaty jostling and the questionable sanitation of ancient travel for a secret ceremony that nobody will actually talk about? Well, that's the allure of mystery for you. The more cryptic the ritual, the more people want to peek behind the curtain. It's like the ancient version of a spoiler-free movie premiere, except this one promises enlightenment or at least a good story to share over wine. The Eleusinian mysteries were the coat-sheller of ancient Greece, minus the flower crowns and overpriced water bottles. At its heart was the story of Demeter and Persephone, a myth so fundamental it could hold its own against today's Marvel cinematic universe. Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, loses her daughter Persephone to Hades, the underworld's brooding landlord. Persephone's annual descent and return explain the seasons. It's a tale of grief, loss, and eventual rebirth, which, let's face it, was a relatable plot for people whose lives depended on the whims of weather. But here's the kicker. You're not just here for a mythic retelling. The Eleusinian mysteries were as much about experiencing the divine as they were about storytelling. Initiates went through a series of rituals so clandestine that even ancient historians like Herodotus had to shrug and admit they didn't really know what went down. What we do know involves a procession from Athens to Eleusis, a 14-mile hike that probably felt like 140 if you were wearing sandals with no arch support. Along the way, you chant, dance, and partake in sacred rites that somehow managed to stay secret for centuries. Quite the feat in ancient Greece, where news traveled faster than a satyr on a wine bender. Participation was not free, of course. The fee was about a month's wages for a skilled worker. Think of it as an ancient VIP pass. This wasn't just a spiritual journey, it was an economic decision. And despite the cost, or perhaps because of it, people from all walks of life, including emperors and philosophers, made this trek. Why? Because the promise was tantalizing, a better afterlife, a connection to the divine, or maybe just an unparalleled sense of belonging. It was the ultimate FOMO, and missing out was not an option for the devout or the curious. Now, while the secrecy was part of the draw, it also leads to some wild speculation. Were there hallucinogenic substances involved? Some think the kaikian, a barley drink consumed during the rites, might have had a little extra kick. A little something to help you commune with the gods, if you catch my drift. Whether or not this holds water, or perhaps a potent brew, the idea adds a layer of intrigue that only fuels the legends. The Eleusinian mysteries were a social leveler of sorts, where slaves could rub elbows with aristocrats, if only spiritually. Once you were initiated, you were part of an exclusive club, and with it came a sense of equality before the gods. It's as if the whole of Greek society agreed to press pause on their rigid hierarchies, at least for a few sacred days. And then there was the climactic revelation, the epoptea. Those who reached this stage were said to have witnessed something so profound it changed their outlook on life and death. What exactly did they see? That's the mystery that's confounded scholars for centuries. Some suggest it was a symbolic reenactment of Persephone's return. Others propose an awe-inspiring display of light and sound. Whatever it was, it left a mark, enough for Cicero to call it one of the greatest gifts of Greek civilization. So why did these mysteries matter? In a world where the afterlife was as uncertain as the next harvest, they offered hope and continuity. They underlined the belief that life, like the seasons, was cyclical. Death was not an end, but a transition. A comforting thought when plagues and wars were as common as olives in a Greek salad. The Eleusinian mysteries might sound like an ancient enigma wrapped in a toga of speculation, but they tell us a lot about the human desire for meaning, community, and a dash of the divine. Whether you think of them as a spiritual awakening or an elaborate theatrical production, there's no denying their impact. It's a testament to the power of mystery, and perhaps to the timeless allure of a good story, one that keeps you wondering long after the procession has ended and the last torch has flickered out. Now, let's dive deeper into the bustling hub of ancient Greece, Athens, where these Eleusinian mysteries weren't just a spiritual journey, they were an economic powerhouse. Picture the scene, a city-state buzzing with activity, a melting pot of merchants, philosophers, and farmers, all converging on this enigmatic event. And while the divine allure was intoxicating, there was another kind of magic at play, cold, hard drachmas. The mysteries were a cash cow, plain and simple. With a participation fee that could set you back a month's wages, the mysteries were a financial commitment comparable to a modern-day music festival ticket, but with eternal perks. In today's terms, think of shelling out a few $1,000s for the chance to see your favorite band, except this band promises to unlock the secrets of the universe, or at least give you a killer light show. For Athens, this was a boon. The influx of pilgrims meant more than packed inns and bustling marketplaces. It was an economic bonanza. Vendors hawked everything from food and drink to trinkets and religious paraphernalia. Imagine an ancient Greek version of Etsy, but with fewer hand-knitted scarves and more amphorae. Local artisans and merchants thrived, and the city's coffers swelled like a well-fed Dionysian reveler. But it wasn't just about the drachmas. It was about the social currency, too. Attending the mysteries wasn't just a spiritual get-together. It was a networking event cloaked in religious garb. Social clout was as much a part of the Eleusinian package as the promise of enlightenment. For the elite, rubbing elbows with fellow aristocrats and the occasional emperor was a chance to flex their status. For the more humble participants, it was an opportunity to break bread with those who usually dined a few social rungs above them. It was as if the gods themselves had invited you to the ultimate mixer, where your worth was measured not by your wealth, but by your willingness to seek the divine. The mysteries also served as a diplomatic stage. Think about it. City-states that were often at each other's throats could set aside their differences, if only temporarily, in the shadow of Eleusis. It was a politically neutral ground where alliances could be forged and rivalries set aside, at least until the next skirmish over olive oil taxes. In a world where warfare was as regular as the tide, these shared sacred experiences knit the Greek world together in a way few other events could. Now, let's not kid ourselves. While the mysteries offered a veneer of unity, they were also a clever play in the grand game of Greek politics. By hosting such a significant religious event, Athens wasn't just flexing its cultural muscles, it was asserting its dominance. The mysteries were a potent reminder of Athens' influence, a subtle declaration that they held the keys to divine knowledge. And in a society where gods were as real as the neighbors, that was no small claim. But let's not romanticize it too much. Underneath the sacred chants and ritual dances, there were rumors and whispers. Some saw the mysteries as an elaborate scheme to control the masses, a spectacle designed to keep the populace in line with promises of posthumous bliss. The idea of enlightenment was a powerful motivator, a carrot dangled before a people who faced the constant specter of mortality. You didn't need to be a cynic to see how such a promise could be politically advantageous. Meanwhile, the economic ripples spread beyond Athens. Traders from far-flung city-states and even foreign lands brought spices, fabrics, and ideas, turning the mysteries into a veritable marketplace of culture and commerce. This exchange was the ancient equivalent of globalization, where the inflow of goods and knowledge helped shape Greek society. The mysteries were a catalyst for economic and cultural fusion, a crossroads of the ancient world where the sacred and the secular danced a delicate waltz. So, as you trudged along the sacred way to Eleusis, sandals pinching and sun blazing, you were part of something greater than a mere religious rite. You were a cog in a vast machine that transcended the spiritual, touching the economic and political realities of the time. The Eleusinian mysteries were a testament to the intricate weave of faith, economy, and power, a tapestry that was as complex as the tales of gods and heroes themselves. The story of the mysteries doesn't end here, though. Like any great saga, it unfurls layer by layer, revealing the threads that bind together the sacred and the social, the divine and the mundane. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the enigma, exploring how these ancient rites left an indelible mark on history and humanity alike. As with any good mystery, the journey promises more twists, turns, and revelations. As the saga of the Eleusinian mysteries continues to unfold, it's time to peel back the toga on how this ancient spectacle was as much about political maneuvering as it was about spiritual enlightenment. Now, you might think that politics and piety make for strange bedfellows, but in ancient Greece, they were inseparable companions, like olives and Phaedra or Plato and his dialogues. Let's start with one of the big shots of the era, Pericles, the maestro of Athenian democracy, whose love affair with power was almost as legendary as his alleged affair with Aspasia. While his golden-tongued orations are often credited for ushering in Athens' glory days, it was his deft use of religious events, like the mysteries, that cemented his grip on power. You see, Pericles wasn't just about building grand structures like the Parthenon. He was also constructing a narrative that linked his leadership to divine favor. By sponsoring religious festivals and encouraging participation in these sacred rites, Pericles effectively played the role of the benevolent shepherd, guiding his flock through both political storms and spiritual journeys. It was a masterclass in political branding. By associating himself with the sacred mysteries, he positioned himself as a conduit to divine wisdom. And let's be honest, who wouldn't want a leader with a direct line to the gods, especially when the gods had a notorious tendency to throw tantrums in the form of plagues and wars? But let's take a closer look at the political theater behind these sacred ceremonies. The Eleusinian mysteries weren't just a spiritual journey. They were a stage upon which Athens could assert its dominance over the Greek world. Picture this. City-states that were often at each other's throats would send their citizens to participate in these rites, effectively acknowledging Athens' cultural supremacy. It was like Athens was hosting the ultimate spiritual summit, where attendance was mandatory, not just for the soul's sake, but for political alliances. And then there was the networking. Oh, the networking. If LinkedIn had existed back then, its servers would have crashed from the sheer volume of connections made during the mysteries. Aristocrats and politicians rubbed shoulders, shared secret rites, and forged alliances that would last long after the torches were extinguished. It wasn't just about spiritual enlightenment. It was about solidifying power structures and ensuring that when the proverbial chips were down, you had a friend in the Athenian assembly. Now, speaking of power plays, let's not forget the role of the priesthood in this grand spectacle. These weren't just any priests. They were part of a hereditary aristocracy, the Eumolpidi and the Kerykes, who held the keys to the sacred knowledge. Their influence was immense, and their support was crucial for any political leader. Think of them as the gatekeepers of both divine and terrestrial power, wielding influence like Zeus wielded thunderbolts. But let's not romanticize their role too much. The priesthood, like any political entity, was not immune to corruption. There were whispers of bribery and manipulation, as ambitious politicians sought to curry favor with these religious elites. It was a delicate dance of power, where spiritual authority was leveraged to sway political outcomes, and vice versa. In the end, it was a system where the sacred and the secular were so intertwined that pulling them apart would have unraveled the very fabric of Greek society. Yet with all this political maneuvering, the mysteries still maintained their allure. Why? Because at their core, they offered something that politics couldn't, a glimpse of the divine, a promise of something greater than the mundane world. It was this tantalizing blend of spirituality and power that kept the masses coming back year after year, despite the whispers and the machinations. And let's not forget the myths themselves, which played a crucial role in this political tapestry. The story of Demeter and Persephone wasn't just a bedtime tale for the ancient Greeks. It was a narrative that reinforced societal norms and political ideologies. The cyclical nature of Persephone's journey mirrored the political cycles of power and governance, offering a divine endorsement of the status quo. It was a subtle reminder that just as Persephone returned to the earth, power too would return to its rightful place, maintaining cosmic order. So, while the Eleusinian mysteries might seem like a mere footnote in the annals of history, they were, in fact, a cornerstone of Greek culture, a nuanced blend of faith, politics, and showmanship. They were a testament to the human desire for meaning and belonging, a desire so potent that it could be harnessed to shape societies and influence empires. As we continue to unravel this enigmatic rite, we'll delve deeper into the myths and realities that defined it. There's still much to explore. The role of women in these rituals, the impact of the mysteries on Greek philosophy, and the inevitable decline of this sacred institution. The story of the mysteries is far from over, and like any good mystery, it promises more revelations as we journey further into its depths. So, buckle up for more twists and turns as we navigate the intricate dance of gods and mortals, power and piety in the ancient world. And as we wade through the sacred waters of Eleusis and its labyrinth of mysticism, let's pivot to a different kind of rite, a Spartan spectacle where secrecy wasn't the allure but sheer, unapologetic brutality was. Enter the crypteia, a Spartan practice that makes Game of Thrones look like a children's story. Picture this, a rite of passage where young Spartan men were sent out in the dead of night to hunt and kill Helots, the state's enslaved population. If that doesn't raise your eyebrows, I don't know what will. Now, before you start picturing these young Spartans as cloak and dagger ninjas, let's get into the gritty details. The Crypteia was less about stealth and more about terror, a strategy to keep the Helot population in check. You see, the Spartans were vastly outnumbered by the Helots, those they had conquered and subjugated. Some estimates suggest that Helots outnumbered Spartans by a ratio of 7 to 1. That's not just a demographic imbalance, it's a pressure cooker waiting to blow. And in this precarious setup, fear was the Spartans' weapon of choice. The Crypteia was a rite of survival as much as it was a ritual of dominance. Young Spartan men, typically around 18 or so, were sent into the countryside with nothing but a knife and their wits. Their mission, to eliminate any Helots considered a threat, or perhaps just unlucky enough to cross paths with a Spartan in need of proving himself. This wasn't just a test of martial prowess. It was a chilling reminder of the lengths to which the Spartans would go to maintain their iron grip on power. And here's where it gets even more twisted. The Crypteia wasn't merely sanctioned by the Spartan state. It was celebrated. It was a display of loyalty and ruthlessness, qualities that were paramount in a society built on the foundations of war. For the Spartans, this ritual was a necessary evil, a brutal means to an end. It was a grim affirmation of their worldview, survival at any cost, even if it meant turning their own youth into instruments of terror. But why did this matter in the grand tapestry of ancient Greek society? Well, the Crypteia was more than just a rite of passage. It was a microcosm of Spartan ideology. It underscored the stark reality that in Sparta, the state came before the individual, and security was purchased with blood. It was a society where fear was an ever-present spectre, not just for the Helots, but also for the Spartans themselves, living under the constant threat of revolt. The Crypteia was a chilling reminder of this delicate balance, a balance maintained through violence and intimidation. Yet, let's not fall into the trap of romanticizing Spartan society as merely a well-oiled war machine. The allure of the Spartan warrior ethos has endured through the ages, painting them as noble warriors with abs chiseled by the gods themselves. But behind the polished shield and spear lay a society gripped by anxiety, forever haunted by the fear of uprising and the need for control. The Crypteia was a manifestation of this anxiety, a desperate attempt to maintain the status quo through sheer force. Now, one might wonder how this kind of ritual would sit with the rest of the Greek world. Was this just a Spartan anomaly, or did it resonate with broader Greek values? The answer is a bit of both. While the sheer brutality of the Crypteia was uniquely Spartan, the underlying principle of maintaining order through fear wasn't unheard of in the ancient world. Greek city-states, though often at odds with each other, shared similar challenges when it came to managing populations and preserving power. The Crypteia, in its own twisted way, reflected broader themes of control and dominance that permeated Greek society. But let's not gloss over the economic aspect of this grim tradition. The Helots were the backbone of the Spartan economy, tasked with agriculture and other menial labor, so the Spartans could focus on what they did best, preparing for war. The Crypteia, therefore, wasn't just about keeping the Helots in line. It was about safeguarding the economic engine that powered Spartan society. In a way, it was an economic strategy cloaked in ritual, a harsh reminder that in the ancient world, survival was often a zero-sum game. And here's where we debunk a myth, the idea that the Spartans were invincible warriors who thrived in a utopian society of martial excellence. The Crypteia exposes the cracks in this narrative, revealing a society that was as fragile as it was fierce. The reality was far from the romanticized image. It was a world where power was precarious, and security was a constant struggle. The Crypteia was a symptom of this fragility, a stark illustration of the lengths to which the Spartans would go to maintain their dominance. So, as we peel back the layers of Spartan society, we uncover a world that is both fascinating and frightening. The Crypteia, with its brutal blend of right and reality, offers a window into the darker aspects of ancient life, a life where power was maintained through fear, and survival was a relentless pursuit. It's a narrative that challenges our perceptions, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable truths behind the legends of Sparta. As we continue to journey through the annals of ancient Greece, we'll delve further into these complex rituals and the societies they shaped. There's still more to explore: the role of women in these traditions, the philosophical underpinnings of such practices, and how these rituals influenced the broader Greek world. The story of ancient Greece is far from over, and like any great epic, it promises more revelations and insights as we dig deeper into the past. So, stay tuned as we uncover more layers of this intricate tapestry, where myth and reality intertwine in a dance as old as time itself. And so, as we dig deeper into the layers of ancient Greece, it's clear that these rituals, whether drenched in the sweat of Eleusis or the blood of Sparta, continue to hold sway over our collective imagination. Why, you ask? Well, it turns out that humans, both ancient and modern, are suckers for a good mystery. There's something irresistibly tantalizing about the unknown, the secret ceremonies behind closed temple doors, the whispered rites of passage in the moonlit fields of Laconia. Consider the Eleusinian mysteries, that enigmatic spiritual carnival of sorts. We might be tempted to romanticize them as ancient seances where initiates whispered with the gods themselves. But peel back the layers, and you'll find a society tapping into a basic human need: the desire for connection, for meaning, for a narrative that makes sense of the senselessness of life and death. When faced with the relentless uncertainty of existence, the Greeks sought comfort in the cyclical tale of Demeter and Persephone, a story that promised rebirth just as the harvest promised sustenance. But let's not kid ourselves. As much as these rites offered solace, they were steeped in the gritty realities of their time. The Eleusinian mysteries weren't just about spiritual enlightenment. They were a well-oiled economic machine. With thousands willing to part with a month's wages for a glimpse behind the divine curtain, Athens reaped the benefits. It was capitalism with a side of spirituality, an ancient lesson that nothing sells better than the promise of eternal bliss. And then there's Sparta, the poster child for the harsh realities lurking beneath the surface of myth. The crypteia was less about noble warriors and more about maintaining a social order through fear, a stark reminder that the Spartans' vaunted military prowess was as much about survival as it was about conquest. This wasn't just a society of warriors. It was a society in perpetual defense mode, its existence precariously balanced on the edge of a knife, both literally and metaphorically. So why do we keep coming back to these stories? Why do they continue to captivate us, thousands of years later? Perhaps it's because they offer a mirror to our own complexities, a reflection of our own struggles with power, belief, and identity. In the Eleusinian mysteries, we find the allure of the unknown, the promise of secrets revealed and truths uncovered. In the stark brutality of the crypteia, we see the lengths to which societies will go to maintain control and order, even when it means sacrificing the very humanity they claim to protect. It's a bit like watching a high-stakes drama unfold, complete with plot twists and existential dilemmas. The ancient Greeks were the original playwrights, crafting narratives that continue to resonate because they tap into universal human experiences. Whether it's the search for meaning in a chaotic world or the struggle for power and survival, these themes are as relevant today as they were in the shadow of the Parthenon or the slopes of Mount Tegidos. And let's be honest, we love a good story, warts and all. The myths may be embellished, the reality's harsh, but that's what makes them so compelling. They remind us that history isn't just a series of dates and events. It's a tapestry of human experience, woven with threads of aspiration and desperation, faith and fear. It's a reminder that behind every legend lies a grain of truth, and behind every truth, a story worth telling. In today's world, where the line between myth and reality often blurs, the ancient Greek rituals offer us a chance to reflect on our own narratives. They challenge us to question the stories we tell ourselves, to peel back the layers of our own myths and confront the realities beneath. They invite us to find meaning in the mysterious, to seek connection in the chaos, and to remember that, like the Greeks before us, we are all part of a larger story, a story that continues to unfold, one mystery at a time. So, as we wrap up this journey through the annals of ancient Greece, let's take a moment to appreciate the enduring legacy of these rituals. They are more than just relics of a bygone era. They are a testament to the timeless human quest for understanding and belonging. Whether through the sacred processions of Eleusis or the shadowy rites of Sparta, They remind us that the search for meaning is as old as civilization itself. As we close the book on this chapter of history, let's not forget the lessons these ancient rites have to offer. They teach us that the pursuit of knowledge, the desire for connection, and the struggle for power are universal themes that transcend time and place. They remind us that while the methods may change, the fundamental questions remain the same. Questions about who we are, where we come from, and where we are headed. And perhaps that's the greatest gift the ancient Greeks have given us. A reminder that in the grand tapestry of human history, we are all threads woven together, each with our own story to tell. So, as you drift off to sleep with visions of ancient processions and Spartan warriors, remember that the mysteries of the past are not so different from the ones we face today. They are a part of us, as we are a part of them, and together we continue to weave the story of humanity, one mystery at a time. You could say the Neo-Assyrian Empire was the ancient version of a rock band that started playing in their garage before hitting the world stage. Picture this. It's 911 BC, and the Assyrians, nestled comfortably in northern Mesopotamia, decided that playing second fiddle to the likes of Babylon and Elam wasn't cutting it anymore. No, they wanted more, like an overachieving teenager who suddenly decides to go from science fair winner to full-fledged mad scientist. Let's rewind a bit. The Assyrians didn't just pop up overnight like a viral TikTok trend. Their origins were humble, even modest. Back in the day, they were building the groundwork for something big, even if they didn't quite know it yet. Their initial domain was centered around Asher, a city named after their god, because branding was crucial even back then. Asher was more than just a divine homage. It was the heartbeat of their early civilization, a bustling hub where trade routes intersected like the ancient world's answer to a modern freeway interchange. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Assyrians weren't just about flexing military muscle. They had a knack for urban planning that would make any city planner today nod in appreciation. They laid down streets like they were drawing the world's first blueprints, organized their cities with precision, and made sure their infrastructure could keep up with their ever-expanding ambitions. You could say they were the original city slickers of the ancient world. So, what was the secret sauce that turned the Assyrians from local players to major league contenders? For starters, they mastered the art of unlikely alliances. You know that scene in every buddy cop movie where two mismatched characters team up and somehow make it work. That was the Assyrian strategy in a nutshell. They forged connections with neighboring regions, sometimes through diplomacy, sometimes through sheer intimidation, and occasionally through a marriage proposal or two. Think of these alliances as the ancient equivalent of strategic partnerships, minus the PowerPoint presentations. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Assyrians weren't exactly handing out friendship bracelets. They were adept at wielding power and influence in ways that would make even the most seasoned politician take notes. They understood that to truly expand, they needed to control the trade routes, the lifeblood of any ancient empire. Control the trade, control the power. It's a tale as old as time, or at least as old as the first merchants who figured out how to charge extra for expedited shipping. Now, every teenage rebellion needs a spark, and for the Assyrians, it was the reign of Admiral Roman II that kick-started their transformation. Ruling from 911 to 891 BC, he was the empire's first real rock star, a king who understood that to make a name for yourself, you had to be bold. Admiral Roman II wasn't content with just ruling Asher. He wanted to expand, and boy, did he. He led campaigns that extended Assyrian influence into neighboring regions, reclaiming territories that had slipped from their grasp. It was like the ultimate game of risk, but with real stakes. Under Admiral Roman II, the Assyrians started to see themselves not just as a regional power, but as a force to be reckoned with. They began to cultivate an aura of invincibility, a reputation that would serve them well in the coming centuries. Their military tactics were honed to perfection, utilizing iron weapons and chariots like the ancient world's version of tanks. And let's not forget their siege warfare, because why knock politely when you can kick down the door with a battering ram? But let's pause for a moment and ask, why does any of this matter? Well, the Assyrian rise was more than just a power grab. It was a shift in the geopolitical landscape that would ripple through history. By expanding their territory and influence, They were setting the stage for an empire that would dominate the Near East for centuries. They were rewriting the playbook on how to build an empire, one conquest at a time. Of course, with every great rise comes the risk of a spectacular fall, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, let's bask in the audacity of the Neo-Assyrian Empire's early days, a time when they were figuring out who they were and what they wanted to become. Like any good coming-of-age story, it was messy, ambitious, and full of potential. And while the Assyrians might not have had a crystal ball to see where their path would lead, they knew one thing for sure: they were just getting started. But just as the Assyrians were finding their groove, the stage was set for the entrance of Ashurnasirpal II in 883 BC, a king who would take their ambitions and dial them up to 11. If Adadnarari II was the empire's opening act, Ashurnasirpal II was the headliner, and he wasn't interested in playing to small crowds. No, this guy wanted to fill stadiums, or, in his case, conquer vast swaths of the ancient world. With a name that sounds like a password you'd never remember, Ashurnasirpal II was anything but forgettable. He was the king who would lead the Assyrians into their golden age, a time when their empire would stretch its borders and flex its muscles like a bodybuilder on competition day. Under his reign, the Assyrians didn't just expand their territory, they reinvented the concept of empire building. It was the ancient equivalent of going from a garage band to selling out the Colosseum overnight. Ashurnasirpal II was a master of both the sword and the trowel. His military campaigns were as relentless as his urban development projects were ambitious. First things first, the guy knew how to throw a party. His coronation feast was the stuff of legends, a 10-day blowout that supposedly fed 574 guests. Talk about a catering nightmare. But it wasn't just about decadence. Ashurnasirpal II understood the power of spectacle. By throwing such an extravagant bash, he was sending a message loud and clear. The Assyrians were here to stay, and they had the resources to back it up. It was the ultimate flex, a way of saying, "Look at us, world. We're not just surviving, we're thriving." And thrive they did. Under Ashurnasirpal II, the Assyrians pushed their borders to new limits, reaching as far as the Mediterranean Sea. This wasn't just about acquiring land. It was about controlling trade routes and resources, the ancient world's equivalent of owning the internet. In this game of territorial chess, Ashurnasirpal II was playing 4D chess while everyone else was stuck with checkers. His campaigns were brutal and efficient, marked by a military prowess that was as much psychological warfare as it was physical. The Assyrians didn't just conquer. They made sure everyone knew what happened to those who resisted. This brings us to one of the less savory aspects of the Assyrian Golden Age, their public relations strategy, or lack thereof. Let's just say the Assyrians weren't winning any humanitarian awards. Their approach to governance could best be described as shock and awe, with a side of "don't mess with us." The Assyrians were masters of the ancient press release, often broadcasting their victories in gory detail to dissuade any would-be challengers. They understood that fear was a powerful tool, and they wielded it like a seasoned social media manager spinning a scandal. The construction of Nimrud, Ashurnasirpal II gleaming capital, was a testament to this philosophy. Built on the site of an ancient city, Nimrud was transformed into a bustling metropolis, complete with grand palaces, temples, and fortifications. Imagine the city as a billboard for Assyrian power, its walls adorned with intricate reliefs depicting their military triumphs and divine right to rule. Nimrud wasn't just a city, it was a statement, a physical embodiment of the Assyrian ethos that declared their dominance to anyone who dared to question it. But let's not get swept away by the grandeur without acknowledging the gritty reality beneath. Building such a city required a workforce, and by workforce, I mean conscripted labor, often drawn from the ranks of those they'd conquered. The Assyrians were the ancient world's taskmasters, and the construction of Nimrud was fueled by an economy of exploitation. Sure, it was a marvel of urban planning, but it came at a cost measured in toil and tears. The glittering facade of Nimrud was built on the backs of the vanquished, an inconvenient truth that gets glossed over in the romantic retellings. This era of expansion and opulence wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about the very fabric of power. The Assyrians were crafting an identity, weaving together military might with cultural sophistication. Ashurnasirpal Roman II reign was marked by a flourishing of the arts, as seen in the detailed bas-reliefs and monumental sculptures that graced Nimrod's palaces. These weren't just decorative, they were propaganda, a visual narrative that reinforced the Assyrians' divine mandate to rule. As we slide further into this golden age, we meet Tiglath-Pileser Roman III, who came to power in 745 BC. If Ashurnasirpal Roman II laid the groundwork, Tiglath-Pileser Roman III was the artist who painted the empire's most expansive portrait. Under his rule, the Assyrian Empire reached its zenith, a sprawling colossus that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, encompassing parts of modern-day Iran, Turkey, and Egypt. It was an empire that would make even the most ambitious of modern leaders green with envy. Tiglath-Pileser Roman III wasn't just a conqueror, he was a reformer. He took the Assyrian military machine and gave it a serious upgrade, transforming it into a standing army that could be deployed with unprecedented speed and efficiency. He reorganized the empire's administration, creating provinces governed by loyal officials to ensure tighter control. It was a bureaucratic revolution, streamlining the empire like a well-oiled corporation. Tiglath-Pileser Roman III was the CEO of Assyria Inc., and business was booming. But with great power comes, well, the temptation to abuse it. The Assyrian military was a double-edged sword, remarkably effective, but also brutally oppressive. Their campaigns were characterized by a scorched earth policy that left a trail of devastation in their wake. Cities were sacked, populations deported, and resistance met with brutal reprisals. The Assyrian method was less about winning hearts and minds, and more about ensuring that those hearts and minds were too terrified to rebel. The economic engine of the empire was fueled by this relentless expansion. Spoils from conquered territories poured into the Assyrian heartland, funding further campaigns and construction projects. The empire's wealth was built on a cycle of conquest and exploitation, a precarious balance that kept the wheels turning, but also sowed the seeds of future instability. It was like riding a tiger, thrilling but potentially disastrous if you ever lost your grip. So, while the Assyrian Golden Age was a time of extraordinary achievement, it was also a period of stark contrast. Empire was a marvel of organization and innovation, yet its foundation was built on the suffering of those who fell under its shadow. The Assyrians were masters of their own narrative, crafting a legacy that celebrated their triumphs while glossing over the harsher truths of their reign. It was a tale of glory and gore, a story that captivated the ancient world and left an indelible mark on history. As we wrap up this chapter in the Assyrian saga, let's remember that every empire, no matter how mighty, must eventually reckon with the forces that drive it. The Assyrians were riding high, but the seeds of their eventual decline were already being sown. For now, though, let's leave them basking in the glow of their achievements, a golden age that would shine brightly even as the shadows began to gather on the horizon. Stay tuned, because the next act in this epic is just around the corner. As the Assyrian Empire basked in the glow of its golden age, another player was gearing up to take the stage, Sargon Roman II. Rising to power in 722 BC, Sargon Roman II wasn't just a ruler. He was an empire whisperer, a man who knew how to juggle the chaos of politics like a circus performer with a penchant for geopolitics. If Tiglath-Pileser Roman III had set the empire on a course for greatness, Sargon Roman II was the one who kept the ship steady through the turbulent waters of expansion and revolt. Sargon Roman II reign was a masterclass in how to balance ambition with pragmatism. He did what any sensible ruler would do when faced with the daunting task of managing a sprawling empire. He reorganized the administration. It was less about tidying up the office, and more about ensuring that the empire's bureaucratic machine ran like a well-oiled chariot. This meant appointing reliable governors and creating a centralized system that could respond swiftly to the inevitable crises that popped up like ancient Mesopotamian whack-a-moles. Let's talk infrastructure, because Sargon Roman II understood that, in the game of empire building, roads and canals were his secret weapons. The Assyrians weren't just about flexing military muscle. They were laying down the logistical backbone of their empire. Sargon Roman II public works projects included the construction of the capital city of Djur-Sharukin, a name that sounds like it could belong to a villain in a fantasy novel. But in reality, it was an urban planner's dream. This wasn't just about having a nice place to live. It was about making a statement of power and permanence, as if to say, we're here to stay, so get used to it. Neo-Assyrian, completed around 706 BC, was designed with precision and flair. The city was a fortified marvel, with walls that stretched over 7 kilometers, containing palaces, temples, and ziggurats. Imagine the ancient world equivalent of a Manhattan skyline, but with more mud bricks and fewer skyscrapers. The grandeur of Neo-Assyrian wasn't just for show. It was a hub of economic activity, strategically positioned to control trade routes and facilitate the flow of goods and tribute to the Assyrian heartland. But let's not be dazzled by the architecture without acknowledging the human cost. Building an entire city from scratch wasn't exactly a DIY weekend project. It required a massive workforce, often composed of captives and conscripted laborers. The construction of Neo-Assyrian was a testament to the Assyrian knack for turning conquest into capital, but it also underscored the harsh realities of imperial exploitation. It was a glittering jewel in the Assyrian crown, but one that gleamed with the sweat and suffering of countless laborers. As Sargon Roman II solidified his control over the empire, he faced the eternal challenge of any ruler, keeping the neighbors in line. His military campaigns were characterized by strategic brilliance and relentless execution. He led expeditions to subdue rebellious regions and extend Assyrian influence from the mountains of Urartu to the plains of Babylon. Each victory was a notch on the empire's belt, a testament to Sargon's ability to wield both diplomacy and devastation with equal skill. Yet, while Sargon Roman II was busy playing geopolitical chess, the empire's internal dynamics were starting to show signs of strain. Maintaining an empire of such vast proportions was like trying to keep a dozen spinning plates in the air. Something had to give eventually. The provinces, while loyal on the surface, were bubbling with discontent beneath. The seeds of rebellion were being sown, and it was only a matter of time before they would bear fruit. Sennacherib, Sargon's son and successor, who took the throne in 705 BC. If Sargon Roman II was the empire's steady hand, Sennacherib was its iron fist. Known for his fierce military campaigns and ambitious building projects, Sennacherib's reign was defined by a ruthless pursuit of power and an insatiable desire to leave his mark on the world. And leave a mark he did, sometimes quite literally, with the scorched earth tactics that became his signature move. Sennacherib's most infamous campaign was against Babylon, a city that had a pesky habit of rebelling against Assyrian rule. In 689 BC, after yet another revolt, Sennacherib decided enough was enough and unleashed the full fury of the Assyrian war machine on the city. The result was catastrophic. Babylon was razed to the ground, its temples destroyed, and its people scattered. It was a brutal lesson in Assyrian diplomacy. When words fail, fire speaks volumes. Not content with just military conquests, Sennacherib also turned his attention to urban development, specifically the city of Nineveh. He transformed it into the empire's shining capital, complete with a palace that was the ancient world's version of a McMansion, expansive, opulent, and a blatant display of wealth. The palace without rival, as it was called, boasted intricate bas-reliefs, grand halls, and extensive gardens. Imagine Versailles, but with more lions and less French. It was a palace designed to awe and intimidate, a fitting residence for a king who ruled through both fear and admiration. But Sennacherib wasn't just about grandiose architecture. He was also a pioneer in infrastructure. One of his crowning achievements was the construction of a sophisticated aqueduct system that brought water to Nineveh from distant mountain springs. This wasn't just about keeping the fountains flowing. It was about demonstrating the power of Assyrian engineering and the king's divine mandate to provide for his city. The aqueduct was a marvel of ancient technology, spanning over 50 kilometers and showcasing the empire's ability to bend nature to its will. Yet, as Sennacherib's reign progressed, the internal pressures within the empire grew. The constant state of war and the heavy burden of tribute and labor demanded by the Assyrian state began to take its toll. Rebellion simmered in the provinces, and the empire's resources were stretched thin. The cracks in the empire's facade were becoming harder to ignore, even as Sennacherib continued to project an image of unassailable power. The Assyrian Empire under Sargon Roman II and Sennacherib was a paradox of progress and oppression, a time when the empire reached its zenith, even as the seeds of decline were being sown. The infrastructure marvels and military triumphs were impressive on the surface, but beneath lay a complex web of economic strain and social unrest. The empire's iron grip on power was being tested, and the question was no longer if the Assyrian colossus would stumble, but when. As we leave this chapter of the Assyrian saga, it's clear that the story is far from over. The empire may have been at its height, but the forces of change were gathering, ready to challenge the might of Assyria. The stage was set for a dramatic turn of events that would test the resilience of this ancient superpower. So hold onto your helmets, because the next act in this epic tale promises to take us on a journey through the turbulence of decline and the struggle for survival. Stay tuned, because the Assyrian Empire's story is about to get even more intriguing. As the Assyrian Empire stood on the precipice of its own grandeur, Ashurbanipal, the last of the great Assyrian kings, stepped into the spotlight in 668 BC. If previous rulers were all brawn and bulldozers, Ashurbanipal was the empire's Renaissance man. Think of him as the bookish cousin at the family reunion who could still throw a mean snowball. He was a rare breed, a king who wielded the sword with one hand and a cuneiform stylus with the other. Ashurbanipal's reign marked a cultural high point for the empire, and nowhere was this more evident than in the library of Nineveh. Picture this, a sprawling repository of knowledge containing over 30,000 clay tablets. It was the ancient world's answer to Google, minus the cat videos. The library housed texts on everything from astrology to medicine, functioning as both a vault of wisdom and a symbol of the king's intellectual prowess. Imagine the logistical nightmare of cataloging all those clay tablets. Talk about a librarian's workout. But let's pull back the curtain and see what's really going on here. While Ashurbanipal was busy curating the greatest hits of Mesopotamian literature, the empire's political cracks were widening. The library, impressive as it was, couldn't plaster over the growing discontent and rebellion simmering just beneath the surface. It was like Rufalstering the couch, while the house burned down around you, a noble effort, but ultimately futile. Ashurbanipal's rule wasn't just about collecting priceless knowledge. It was also a time of peculiar diplomacy and questionable decisions. The king's choice to wage war against his own brother, Shamash-Shumukin, who ruled over Babylon as a puppet king, is a case in point. It's a classic tale of sibling rivalry, but with far more catastrophic stakes. Imagine a family Thanksgiving where the turkey gets replaced by a full-scale siege. This internal conflict, which began in 652 BC, was not just a personal spat. It was a microcosm of the empire's broader instability. The rebellion in Babylon wasn't just about brotherly love gone sour. It was fueled by resentment over Assyrian domination, a theme that echoed throughout the empire. The Babylonian revolt drew support from across the region, including Elam and the Chaldeans, highlighting the fractures in Ashurbanipal's dominion. It was as if the empire's provinces were attending a rebellious potluck, each bringing their own dish of dissent to the table. Ashurbanipal eventually crushed the Babylonian rebellion in 648 BC, but the victory came at a cost. The devastation left Babylon a shadow of its former self, and the effort drained resources and manpower from an already overstretched empire. It's the age-old story of winning the battle, but losing the war, or at least setting yourself up to lose later on. The financial and human cost of maintaining such extensive military campaigns was a burden the empire could barely shoulder. Meanwhile, on the international stage, Ashurbanipal was playing a dangerous game of chess. His military campaigns against Elam in the 640s BC were another attempt to assert Assyrian dominance. The Elamite capital, Susa, was sacked in 647 BC, its treasures carted off to Nineveh, and its people left to pick up the pieces. If history teaches us anything, it's that every empire has a breaking point, and Ashurbanipal's relentless campaigns only brought Assyria closer to its own. Back home, the economic engine of the empire was beginning to sputter. The constant state of warfare, coupled with the demands of tribute and labor, was a recipe for economic disaster. The Assyrian economy, once a well-oiled machine powered by conquest and exploitation, was now creaking under the weight of its own ambitions. The spoils of war could no longer cover the mounting costs, and the empire was beginning to feel the strain. Ashurbanipal's reign was also marked by a curious paradox. While the empire was culturally flourishing, politically, It was unraveling. The library of Nineveh stood as a beacon of intellectual achievement, yet it was surrounded by an empire in turmoil. It was as if the Assyrian Empire was living out its own tragic opera, with Ashurbanipal conducting the orchestra as the stage crumbled beneath him. As we dig deeper into the Assyrian playbook, it becomes clear that Ashurbanipal's reign was a turning point, a moment when the empire's strengths were overshadowed by its vulnerabilities. The king's pursuit of knowledge and culture was admirable, but it couldn't paper over the cracks of an empire stretched too thin. The Assyrians were masters of their own narrative, but even they couldn't rewrite the harsh realities of overextension and unrest. The empire's decline was like a slow-motion train wreck, fascinating yet inevitable. The once mighty Assyrian war machine, which had rolled over kingdoms like a juggernaut, was now running on fumes. The constant demand for resources and manpower was unsustainable, and the provinces that had once been controlled with an iron grip were slipping through the empire's fingers like grains of sand. With Ashurbanipal's death in 631 BC, the stage was set for further chaos. The power vacuum left in his wake was like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode into a full-blown crisis. The political fractures that had been papered over by Ashurbanipal's cultural achievements were now exposed, and the empire was teetering on the brink of collapse. The Assyrian Empire, once a colossus striding across the ancient world, was now a giant with feet of clay. But let's not jump to the grand finale just yet. The decline of the Assyrian Empire is a tale with more twists and turns than a soap opera plot. As the empire grappled with internal strife and external threats, the story was far from over. The next chapter in this epic saga would see the Assyrian juggernaut face its stiffest challenges yet, as the forces of change gathered momentum and set the stage for the empire's dramatic downfall. Stay tuned, because the best, or worst, depending on your perspective, is yet to come. As the Assyrian Empire teetered on the brink, the final act of its grand saga was about to unfold. The empire, once a monumental force that had steamrolled its way across the Near East, was now like an overextended rubber band, ready to snap. The stage was set for the ultimate showdown, the sacking of Nineveh in 612 BC and the decisive Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC. These were not just events, but the final nail in the coffin of an empire that had thrived on military might and ruthless efficiency. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Nineveh's downfall. Imagine Nineveh, the jewel of the Assyrian crown, with its colossal walls that stretched over 12 kilometers and boasted some of the most impressive fortifications of the time. Yet, despite its grandeur, the city was about to face a coalition of forces that had one thing in common: a deep-seated resentment for Assyrian dominance. The Medes, Babylonians, Scythians, and Cimmerians, a veritable who's who of ancient power players, decided to band together for a little payback. The siege of Nineveh was less a medieval siege and more an ancient blockbuster event. The Allies knew that taking down Nineveh wasn't just about brute force. It was about exploiting the cracks that had already formed in the Assyrian facade. Internal strife, economic strain, and a demoralized population made the city more vulnerable than its imposing walls suggested. After a 3-month siege, the walls were breached, and Nineveh fell in a spectacular blaze of fire and fury. The city, once a symbol of Assyrian invincibility, was reduced to rubble, its treasures looted, and its citizens scattered. But why did this matter? Nineveh's fall was a turning point, a moment when the empire that had once dictated terms to the world found itself on the receiving end of history's ruthless judgment. It was a dramatic illustration of the age-old adage, what goes up must come down. The Assyrians, who had ruled with an iron fist, discovered that even the mightiest cannot withstand the combined forces of internal decay and external aggression. Yet the story wasn't quite over. Enter the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC, the final curtain call for the beleaguered Assyrian Empire. Carchemish, strategically perched on the banks of the Euphrates River, became the stage for a showdown between the remnants of Assyrian power, bolstered by Egyptian allies, and the rising Babylonian Empire led by Nebuchadnezzar Roman II. This wasn't just a battle, it was the epic finale of a long-running saga. The battle itself was a clash of titans, a kinetic symphony of chariots, infantry, and cavalry that would have made even the guards sit up and take notice. By the end of the day, the Babylonians emerged victorious, and the Assyrian-Egyptian forces were in full retreat. The defeat at Carchemish wasn't just a military loss. It was the final gasp of an empire that had once been the master of its own destiny. As the dust settled, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which had once stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, vanished from the map, its legacy left to the annals of history. So, what do we take away from this saga of rise and fall? The Assyrians, with their penchant for military innovation, urban development, and cultural achievements, left an indelible mark on history. Their legacy is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of glory and brutality, a reminder that empires are as much a product of their internal dynamics as they are of their external conquests. The Assyrian story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of overreach, the perils of neglecting the human cost of empire building, and the inevitability of change. It reminds us that while empires may rise on the wings of ambition and strength, they can just as easily fall into the abyss of hubris and complacency. The Neo-Assyrian Empire, once a titan of the ancient world, now serves as a timeless lesson in the cyclical nature of history. As we close the book on the Assyrian Empire, let's not forget the lessons it offers. The Assyrians were masters of their own narrative, yet even they couldn't escape the inexorable forces of history. Their story, a blend of awe-inspiring achievements and sobering realities, serves as a poignant reminder of the fragile nature of human endeavors. So, as you drift off to sleep with newfound knowledge, remember that every empire, no matter how mighty, is ultimately built on the shifting sands of time. In the buzzing markets of Kunming, among the cacophony of traders peddling silks and spices, a young boy named Mahi stood out, not just because he was taller than most kids his age, but because he had a glint in his eyes that seemed to say, "I'm destined for more than this." Born in 1371 in the Yunnan province, Mahi was a Muslim, a rarity in the predominantly Han Chinese milieu. His family could trace its roots back to a Persian grandfather, which added a splash of exotic flair to the boy's lineage, like a family recipe with a secret ingredient, if you will. But life was about to deal Mahi a hand that was as dramatic as a soap opera plot twist. In 1381, when he was just 10, the Ming dynasty decided to flex its muscles and annex Yunnan. The Ming forces swooped in, and before you could say dynastic upheaval, Mahi was captured. Talk about a childhood detour. And as if being taken from your home wasn't enough, he was castrated. Yes, you heard that right, and sent to serve in the imperial palace. Welcome to the world of eunuchs, where manhood is less about biology and more about surviving the political jungle. Now, you might think being a eunuch was all doom and gloom, but it was kind of a mixed bag. For some, it was a ticket to high places, like a backstage pass to the corridors of power. Mahi, who later took the name Zheng, turned this peculiar twist of fate into a stepping stone, or better yet, a launch pad. He caught the eye of the ambitious Yongle Emperor, a ruler with grand visions of Ming dominance that would make even the most power-hungry empire builder blush. The early 15th century was a time when China was flexing its dynastic muscles like a bodybuilder in front of a mirror. The Ming dynasty, founded in 1368, was still relatively fresh on the scene, like a new kid who just transferred to the School of Empires and wanted everyone to know he wasn't just there to blend in. The Yongle Emperor, who reigned from 1402 to 1424, was particularly keen on showing off. He wanted everyone to know that China wasn't just a big deal, it was the asterisk big deal. And Zheng, he was his secret weapon, his ace in the hole. But before Zheng he could start charting new waters, he had to navigate the treacherous tides of court politics. The Ming court was a veritable shark tank, and not the kind with friendly investors. Eunuchs, often dismissed as mere court flunkies, wielded considerable influence, sometimes more than the scholars and officials who looked down their noses at them. Zheng He, with his keen mind and knack for diplomacy, became a trusted aide to the emperor. He was like the Swiss army knife of the Ming court, reliable, versatile, and indispensable. The political climate of early 15th century China was a fascinating mix of ambition, intrigue, and rivalry. The Yongle Emperor had usurped the throne from his nephew, the Jianwen Emperor, and was keen on legitimizing his rule. What better way to do that than to show the world that the Ming dynasty was a force to be reckoned with? Forget subtle diplomacy. The Yongle Emperor wanted to make a grand entrance on the global stage, like the kid who shows up to the party wearing a crown and carrying a scepter. Zheng, he was the perfect man for the job. He was tasked with leading the treasure fleet, a flotilla of gargantuan ships that would sail the seas, bearing gifts and establishing diplomatic relations. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a world tour, but instead of rock bands, it was statecraft, and instead of groupies, there were foreign dignitaries. The fleet's flagship, the Beotian, was a behemoth stretching over 400 feet long and 160 feet wide, a floating testament to China's engineering prowess. But before Zheng, he could embark on this maritime adventure. He had to navigate the labyrinthine corridors of the Forbidden City. Here, decisions were made, alliances were forged, and sometimes, if you weren't careful, your career could sink faster than a lead balloon. Zheng He's rise through these corridors was nothing short of meteoric. He was like that student who not only aces every class, but also knows how to play the teacher's pet game to perfection. The Yongle Emperor's ambitions were vast, like the ocean itself. He wanted to expand trade, establish China's dominance, and secure tribute from far-flung lands. In a way, he was like an ancient influencer, keen on collecting followers and likes, or in this case, allegiance and loyalty from distant shores. Zheng He, with his diplomatic flair and strategic mind, was the perfect ambassador of this vision. As Zheng He prepared to set sail, he carried the weight of the emperor's ambitions on his shoulders. But he was no stranger to pressure. After all, navigating the intrigues of the imperial court was probably more treacherous than any stormy sea he would face. And yet, there was a sense of destiny about Zheng He, as if he was meant to bridge worlds and connect cultures. His life was about to become the stuff of legends, but beneath the myth was a man who had learned to play the game of power with grace and cunning. In Zheng He, the Yongle Emperor found not just a trusted aide, kindred spirit, someone who understood the grand vision and was ready to sail into uncharted waters to make it a reality. This was a time when the world was both vast and interconnected, and Zheng He was about to carve a path through history, not with a sword, but with the steady hand of diplomacy and the adventurous spirit of exploration. And so, as the Ming dynasty prepared to announce its presence on the global stage, Zheng He stood ready to steer China into a new, one wave at a time. As the sun rose over Nanjing, the air buzzed with the anticipation of something monumental. Zheng He stood on the deck of the Beotian, the flagship of the treasure fleet, ready to turn the Yongle Emperor's dreams into reality. The sheer scale of this naval venture was like nothing the world had ever seen. The fleet consisted of over 300 ships, each one a marvel of engineering, and a staggering 27,000 men, sailors, soldiers, and traders ready to embark on this grand journey. To put this in perspective, Columbus sailed the ocean blue with just 3 ships and about 90 men. In the world of maritime expeditions, Zheng He's fleet was the equivalent of a blockbuster movie cast with an endless budget. These weren't just any ships either. The treasure ships, or Beotian, were the crown jewels of the fleet. Each one was a floating fortress, measuring approximately 440 feet in length and 180 feet in width. If you're struggling to visualize that, imagine a football field with a bit extra on the side for good measure. They were equipped with multiple decks, watertight compartments, an innovation that would have caused a few European shipbuilders to spill their grog, and grand quarters fit for high-ranking officials and diplomats. These vessels could carry hundreds of tons of cargo, a necessity given that they were essentially floating bazaars, packed with silk, porcelain, and other Chinese goods to woo foreign dignitaries. But let's talk logistics, because this wasn't just a matter of pushing off from shore and going where the wind took you. This was a meticulously planned operation, a masterclass in maritime management. Each ship was like a self-sufficient city, stocked with food, fresh water, and supplies, including live animals for fresh meat. It was like taking a farm on a cruise. And the investment, well, it was no pocket change. This fleet cost the Ming treasury a fortune, a testament to the emperor's commitment to his vision. The financial burden was enormous, with the cost of materials, labor, and provisions stretching the empire's resources. But to Yongle, this was not just an expense. It was an investment in prestige and influence. Now, setting sail wasn't just about the destination. It was about making a statement. This was China announcing its presence on the global stage with the naval equivalent of a mic drop. The first voyage, which began in 1405, took the fleet through the South China Sea and into the Indian Ocean. These waters were the ancient highways of trade, bustling with merchants and mariners from all corners of Asia and beyond. Zheng He's fleet was not just there to chart new waters, but to cement China's status as a titan of commerce and diplomacy. It was a move that married soft power with hard presence, a diplomatic dance that involved as much strategic posturing as it did cultural exchange. The journey to Southeast Asia was like a diplomatic debutante ball, with Zheng He playing the role of the charming envoy. The fleet visited kingdoms that are today's Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia, among others. These were bustling centers of trade, where spices and precious woods were exchanged like tweets in a digital age. Everywhere they docked, the Chinese fleet was greeted with awe. The sight of such massive ships, the pomp of the Chinese court, and the wealth they carried was enough to make even the most hardened king or sultan do a double take. But let's not romanticize this too much. There was a strong undercurrent of power dynamics at play. The gifts exchanged were not merely tokens of goodwill, but symbols of allegiance and subordination. The Ming dynasty was keen to establish a tributary system, a network of states acknowledging China's supremacy in exchange for trade rights and protection. It was the ancient version of a strategic alliance, where the handshake came with a few strings attached. Zheng He's role was to ensure these strings were tied neatly and firmly. As the fleet pushed further into the Indian Ocean, it encountered the bustling ports of the Malabar coast in present-day India. These were hubs of the spice trade, where the air was thick with the scent of pepper and cardamom. The local rulers, intrigued by the Chinese visitors, were eager to engage in trade, but they were also wary of the implications of this newfound friendship. The arrival of the Chinese fleet was like a royal visit with a hint of an audit. It was a delicate balance of diplomacy, trade, and the subtle assertion of power. Economically, this voyage was a gold mine for the Ming dynasty. The goods exchanged and the trade routes established were vital to China's economic expansion. The profits from these ventures helped fill the imperial coffers, offsetting the initial costs of the fleet. It was a testament to the interconnectedness of trade and diplomacy, where economic gains were as much about soft power as they were about the hard currency. However, let's not get carried away with visions of unending prosperity and harmony. While the voyages were hailed as triumphs of Chinese diplomacy and engineering, they also sparked tensions. Not everyone was thrilled about the Ming dynasty's growing influence. Some saw the treasure fleet as a harbinger of Chinese hegemony, a fearsome display of power that could easily shift from diplomatic to domineering. And yet, despite these challenges, the voyages of Zheng He were monumental in reshaping the maritime landscape of the time. They were a testament to the vision of the Yongle Emperor and the capabilities of his trusted eunuch Admiral. These expeditions were more than just a series of naval exercises. They were a statement of intent, a declaration that China was a force to be reckoned with, both on land and at sea. As the first voyage came to a close, the seeds of future expeditions had already been planted. The success of this maiden journey ensured that Zheng He and his fleet would sail again, each time venturing further and pushing the boundaries of the known world. But as with all great endeavors, these voyages were not without their complexities and controversies, a story of ambition, power, and the eternal dance between might and diplomacy. Stay tuned, because the waves of history are far from settled. And so, with the first voyage behind him, Zheng He returned to China not just as a hero, but as a legend in the making. The Yongle Emperor was thrilled, and who wouldn't be? The treasure fleet had brought back more than just exotic goods. It had returned with stories, alliances, and a hefty boost to China's prestige. But let's not get all misty-eyed about this nautical odyssey. The reality was a bit more complex, and as we wade into the cultural exchanges and encounters that followed, we'll see just how tangled the ropes of diplomacy and destiny can become. The second voyage set sail in 1407, and if the first was a diplomatic handshake, this one was a full-blown embrace. Zheng He's fleet once again cut through the seas like a knife through butter, this time with a clearer mission: extend the tributary system and gather more allies. Now, the size of Zheng He's fleet was enough to make even the most seasoned mariner raise an eyebrow. Picture over 300 ships, some of them as large as today's aircraft carriers. gliding through the water like a migrating metal leviathan. It was an awe-inspiring display of naval might, and it made quite an impression on the kingdoms it visited. Cultural exchanges during these voyages were as colorful as a Ming dynasty porcelain vase. In Southeast Asia, India, and even as far as the Arabian Peninsula, the fleet was greeted with curiosity and occasionally a touch of trepidation. The Chinese brought gifts that were as dazzling as they were strategic: silk, porcelain, tea, and even gold. It was the classical equivalent of bringing a housewarming gift, but instead of a bottle of wine, it was the finest goods from the Middle Kingdom. In return, Zheng and his crew encountered a veritable smorgasbord of cultural influences. They brought back exotic animals like giraffes and zebras, which must have been quite a sight when paraded through the streets of Nanjing. Imagine the spectacle: creatures that looked like they'd walked straight out of a mythical bestiary, now part of the imperial menagerie. These animals were more than just curiosities. They were symbols of the far-reaching influence and connections of the Ming dynasty. But let's not sugarcoat the complexities of these interactions. The gifts exchanged weren't just tokens of friendship. They were also symbols of power dynamics. Accepting a gift from the Chinese emperor often meant acknowledging his supremacy, a fact that wasn't lost on the rulers of these foreign lands. This wasn't just diplomacy. It was a masterclass in soft power, where every silk scroll and porcelain vase came with a subtle message: welcome to the Ming dynasty's sphere of influence. Of course, not all encounters were as smooth as silk. The seas were teeming with pirates, the ancient version of highway robbers, but with a lot more water involved. These swashbucklers posed a constant threat, and Zheng's fleet had its fair share of skirmishes. In fact, the Admiral didn't just rely on diplomacy. He knew when to flex a little muscle. In 1413, he dealt with the pirate Chen Zui off the coast of Sumatra with the kind of decisiveness that would make any action movie hero nod in approval. Chen Zui's defeat was swift and brutal, a clear message that the treasure fleet wasn't just a bunch of diplomats in fancy robes. Then there was the political intrigue, which was as thick as a bowl of Beijing duck soup. The Ming court was a hotbed of factionalism and rivalry, with ministers and eunuchs jostling for power like players in a high-stakes chess game. Zheng, with his growing influence, wasn't immune to this. There were those who saw the treasure voyages as an extravagant folly, a drain on the empire's resources that could be better spent elsewhere. The tension between the pro-voyage and anti-voyage factions was palpable, and it added an extra layer of complexity to Zheng's maritime missions. Yet, despite the challenges, the long-term impacts of these voyages were significant. They helped establish China as a global powerhouse, a nation whose influence extended far beyond its borders. Trade routes were expanded, and diplomatic relations were forged that would last for decades. China's cultural footprint grew, as did its economic reach. The voyages were a testament to the interconnectedness of the world, a reminder that even in the 15th century, globalization was more than just a modern buzzword. But let's not forget the myths that have swirled around these voyages like a dense fog. Some tales would have you believe that Zheng's fleet sailed as far as the Americas or Australia, a claim that historians have largely debunked. These legends, while thrilling, are more fiction than fact. The reality is impressive enough: a series of monumental journeys that reshaped the maritime landscape, without needing to embellish the narrative with fantastical voyages to lands unknown. As we continue to unspool this saga, it's worth remembering that Zheng's story is as much about human ambition and vision as it is about ships and seas. It's a tale of a world on the cusp of transformation, where cultural exchanges and encounters were as integral to the fabric of history as the sails that powered the treasure fleet. The waves of history are far from settled, and as Zheng's voyages continue, so too does our exploration of the truths, the myths, and the enduring legacy of China's great mariner. Stay tuned, because there's more to this story than meets the eye. The winds of change are blowing, and Zheng's adventures are far from over. As we dive deeper into the next chapter, we'll see how these voyages continue to shape the world, leaving ripples that will be felt for centuries to come. As Zheng's ventures continued, the tides of history were subtly shifting beneath his fleet's massive hulls. The death of the Yongle Emperor in 1424 marked a turning point not just for Zheng, but for the entire Ming dynasty's foreign policy. With the new emperor, Hongxi, taking the throne, China's grand maritime ambitions faced a recalibration that would make even the boldest sailor hesitate. Hongxi was a practical man, less interested in overseas glory and more focused on consolidating power and addressing domestic issues. Picture a ruler more concerned with tightening the empire's belt than with flaunting its riches on the high seas. The lavish expenditures of the treasure fleet, which had previously been justified as investments in prestige, suddenly seemed like opulent follies. The costs were staggering. Each voyage demanded resources that could have funded entire provinces. The Ming treasury, stretched thinner than a Beijing pancake, was feeling the pressure. The Hongxi Emperor's short reign saw a swift pivot in policy. The treasure fleet was ordered back, its sails furled like flags of a bygone era. Zheng he found himself navigating not the seas, but the murky waters of court politics, where the currents were just as treacherous. The winds had changed, and for now, the grand expeditions were docked indefinitely. It was a stark reminder that even the mightiest armadas are subject to the whims of political tide. Yet, the allure of the sea proved irresistible, and under the Xuan Emperor, Hongxi's successor, Zheng he was once again called upon to lead a fleet. But this was not a return to the golden days of maritime dominance. By the time Zheng he set sail on his seventh and final voyage in 1431, the world was a different place. The fleet was a shadow of its former glory, smaller and less ostentatious, a reflection of the empire's shifting priorities. Economically, Ming China was turning inward, focusing on land-based trade routes and internal stability. The Silk Road, with its bustling caravanserais and exotic goods, was regaining prominence. The maritime trade, once a beacon of Ming ambition, was now seen as a costly endeavor with uncertain returns. The economic calculus had changed, and Zheng he's voyages, once the pride of the empire, were now scrutinized with a skeptical eye. Externally, the geopolitical landscape was no longer as hospitable. Rival powers, emboldened by China's temporary retreat, began asserting themselves. The Indian Ocean, once a playground for Zheng he's fleet, was becoming a contested space. The Portuguese were making their presence felt, carving out a maritime empire with the zeal of pioneers on a treasure hunt. The world was getting smaller, and the Ming dynasty's appetite for expansion was waning. Internally, the Ming court was rife with debate. Scholars and officials, wary of the eunuch's influence, argued that the resources spent on these voyages could be better used elsewhere. It was a classic case of priorities clashing. Should the empire look outward, to distant shores and potential allies, or inward, to its heartland and its own people? The debate was heated, and Zheng he, caught in the middle, was a man out of time, a navigator without a map. Despite the romantic tales that painted Zheng he as a mythical figure, a maritime Marco Polo with a fleet of floating palaces, the reality was far more nuanced. His voyages were not simply about exploration. They were a complex tapestry of diplomacy, trade, and power dynamics. The legends of Zheng he's encounters in distant lands, while captivating, often gloss over the gritty details. These weren't just grand adventures. They were strategic maneuvers in a world where allegiances were as fluid as the tides. Zheng he himself became a symbol of China's past glories, a relic of an era when the Middle Kingdom's reach seemed limitless. Yet, his story is not just one of conquest and exploration. It's a tale of ambition tempered by reality, of vision colliding with practicality. As the Ming dynasty's focus shifted, so too did the narrative of Zheng he's voyages. Once celebrated as triumphs of diplomacy and engineering, they were now scrutinized for their costs and questioned for their necessity. The allure of the sea and the romance of exploration have always captured the human imagination, but the practicalities are often less glamorous. Ships need maintenance, crews need salaries, and the tides of politics can be as unpredictable as the ocean itself. Zheng he's voyages, despite their legendary status, were no exception. They were a testament to the possibilities of human endeavor, but also a reminder of its limitations. As we chart the course of Zheng he's legacy, we find a world in transition. The Ming dynasty, once poised to dominate the seas, was turning its gaze inward, a giant contemplating its own reflection. The cessation of the treasure fleet voyages was not just a strategic decision. It was a sign of the times, a harbinger of shifts to come in global power dynamics. So, as we leave Zheng he for now, it's worth pondering the legacy he left behind. A legacy not just of exploration, but of ambition and caution, of triumphs and trials. His voyages remind us that history is a complex dance of vision and pragmatism, where the dreams of empires are tempered by the realities of time and tide. And while the waves of history may have settled for now, the story of China's great explorer continues, as the echoes of his adventures ripple through the ages. In the wake of Zheng He's final voyage, the ripples of his expeditions began to settle, leaving behind a legacy as vast and intricate as the seas he once sailed. The towering figure of Zheng He, both literally and metaphorically, loomed large in the annals of history, casting a shadow that would stretch far beyond the Ming dynasty's eventual decline. But what did these legendary voyages truly achieve, and how have they shaped our understanding of the world? First, let's talk tangible outcomes. Zheng He's fleet, at its peak, was an unmatched display of naval prowess, a floating city-state that traversed the maritime routes from Southeast Asia to the East African coast. 7 voyages over nearly 3 decades, from 1405 to 1433, created a web of trade and diplomatic relationships that enriched the Chinese empire both materially and culturally. Exotic goods flowed into China, ivory, spices, and even the odd giraffe, turning the imperial court into a veritable zoo of diplomatic trophies. But this exchange wasn't just about shiny trinkets, it was about influence. The Ming dynasty's tributary system expanded, and with it, China's soft power. Yet, for all its grandeur, the treasure fleet story is as much about what could have been as what actually was. The cessation of these voyages was, in many ways, a historical fork in the road. Imagine a world where China, instead of turning inward, continued its maritime dominance. Would the age of exploration have had a distinctly Asian flavor, with Chinese junks bumping elbows with European caravels in the New World? It's a tantalizing what if, a reminder of history's penchant for taking unexpected turns. Economically, the impact of Zheng He's voyages has been a topic of heated debate. On one hand, they opened up new trade routes and brought wealth into China. On the other, they were a financial black hole, draining the imperial treasury at a time when resources could have been better spent fortifying the Great Wall against the growing Mongol threat. In today's terms, it was like choosing between investing in a visionary tech startup and securing your home against a looming hurricane. The Ming dynasty opted for the latter, and history, with its usual irony, recorded the consequences. Politically, the voyages were a double-edged sword. They solidified China's status as a superpower, yet they also highlighted the tensions within the Ming court. The eunuchs, who championed the expeditions, clashed with Confucian scholars who viewed them as extravagant and unnecessary. It was a classic battle of ideals, with the proponents of tradition pitted against the advocates of expansion. In the end, the scholars won out, and China pivoted towards isolationism, a decision that would echo through the centuries. Globally, the legacy of Zheng He is both celebrated and overshadowed. While his name doesn't roll off the tongue in the West, quite like Columbus or Magellan, his voyages were monumental in their own right. They predated the European age of discovery by decades, and yet their impact has often been underplayed. Perhaps it's because Zheng He wasn't driven by the same motives as his European counterparts. There were no mythical lands to conquer, no quests for gold or conversion. His expeditions were diplomatic missions, not imperial conquests, and perhaps therein lies the rub. In a world enamored with tales of conquest, Zheng He's story is one of connection. And let's not ignore the myths. Oh, the myths. They swirl around Zheng He like a fog, obscuring the clear view of history. Tales of voyages to the Americas or Australia persist, despite a lack of evidence. These legends, while thrilling, are more about what we want history to be than what it is. They speak to a human desire for adventure and discovery, for tales of far-off lands and daring feats. But the reality, as always, more nuanced. The true story of Zheng He is one of ambition tempered by pragmatism, of dreams set against the harsh backdrop of political reality. Yet, the fascination with Zheng He endures. Perhaps it's the scale of his achievements, the sheer audacity of launching a fleet of such magnitude in an era when the known world was still largely a mystery. Or maybe it's his story. A boy from Yunnan, captured and castrated, rising to become one of the most powerful men in China. It's a classic rags-to-riches tale, with the added drama of high seas adventure. As we reflect on Zheng He's legacy, it's crucial to remember the lessons his voyages impart. They remind us of the power of exploration and diplomacy, of the potential for peaceful engagement with the world. They also serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of turning inward, of closing oneself off from the broader world. In an era of globalization, where borders are more porous than ever, the story of Zheng is a timely reminder of the interconnectedness of humanity. The enduring appeal of Zheng lies in his ability to bridge worlds. He was a Muslim serving a Confucian emperor, a eunuch commanding a fleet that spanned continents. His life was a testament to the complexity of identity, to the idea that we are more than the sum of our parts. In a world that often seeks to define and categorize, Zheng He's story celebrates the beauty of diversity. So, as we sail away from the shores of Zheng He's narrative, what remains is a legacy as vast as the ocean itself. His voyages were a dance of diplomacy, trade, and exploration, a reminder that the seas connect us, even as they separate. In the grand tapestry of history, Zheng He stands as a symbol of what can be achieved when we set sail into the unknown, guided by curiosity and courage. His story may be rooted in the past, but its echoes reach far into the future, urging us to explore, to connect, and to dream. If you think high-stakes political drama and Machiavellian intrigue are exclusive to the modern age, you clearly haven't heard about 4th century BCE India. Step aside. Game of Thrones. The rise of Chandragupta Maurya is a tale of power plays and cunning that would make even the Lannisters blush. Chandragupta, the scrappy underdog who went from zero to hero, is not just an ancient footnote, but a testament to the fact that the little guy can sometimes reign supreme. At a time when the subcontinent was a jigsaw puzzle of feuding states and ambitious rulers, he managed to assemble one of the largest empires in Indian history. Move over, Netflix, because this story has the plot twists you didn't know you needed. Our story kicks off in the chaotic political marsh pit that was India in the 4th century BCE. Picture dozens of small kingdoms, republics and tribes, each with its own agenda and a penchant for backstabbing. Think of it as a very crowded chessboard, full of players who haven't quite figured out the rules, but are determined to win anyway. Enter Chandragupta Maurya, who wasn't exactly born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Instead, he emerged from a family that most historical records would describe as less than royal, a detail that only adds to his underdog appeal. But let's not jump the gun. To understand Chandragupta's rise, you need to meet the man behind the curtain, Chanakya. Think of him as the Yoda to Chandragupta's Luke Skywalker, with a touch of Machiavelli thrown in for good measure. Chanakya, also known as Cordelia, was a Brahmin scholar with a chip on his shoulder the size of a small mountain range. This guy had brains, and he wasn't afraid to use them. It's said that he was ousted from the Nanda court in Magadha, an event that made him about as happy as a cat in a rainstorm. His solution: find a promising young leader, teach him the ropes, and take over the world. No big deal. The political landscape at the time was as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. The Nanda dynasty had managed to irritate just about everyone with their heavy taxation and general disdain for, well, everyone else. They were fabulously wealthy, but not exactly winning any popularity contests. Imagine a regime that was the ancient equivalent of a bad manager with too much power and not enough people skills. The perfect target for someone like Chanakya, who was harboring dreams of regime change. Chanakya's strategy wasn't just about brute force, it was about playing the long game. He brought to the table something that was part economics textbook, part political thriller, the Arthashastra. This ancient treatise, attributed to our wily scholar, is essentially a guide on how to run an empire. It covers everything from espionage to taxation, combining the wisdom of Sun Tzu with the practicality of an ancient accountant. If you ever thought politics was about ideals, the Arthashastra would beg to differ. It's all about power and how to keep it, preferably while sitting atop a throne. With Chanakya's guidance, Chandragupta started to assemble a power base, much like a shrewd entrepreneur gathering investors. His army was a melting pot of mercenaries, disgruntled soldiers, and anyone else who had a bone to pick with the Nandas. And what a bone it was! The Nanda dynasty's unpopularity was so pervasive it practically begged for a coup. Chandragupta's forces, buoyed by Chanakya's tactics, turned discontent into a full-blown revolution. Now, here's where things get spicy. The Nandas, despite their wealth, fell like a deck of cards. In a series of military campaigns that would put any epic battle movie to shame, Chandragupta and his ragtag army took on the well-heeled Nanda forces and won. According to historical accounts, Chandragupta managed to capture the Nanda capital of Pataliputra in 321 BCE. Numbers are sketchy, but the Maurya Empire at its height controlled over 5 million square kilometers. Not bad for a guy who started from the bottom. But don't let the fairy tale narrative fool you. Chandragupta's rise was anything but a smooth ride. The political chess game involved betrayal, strategic marriages, and alliances as fickle as the Indian monsoon. Chandragupta had to navigate this treacherous landscape while keeping his eyes on the prize and his neck away from any lurking daggers. This wasn't just about conquering land. It was about winning hearts and minds, or at least keeping them from rebelling. Chanakya's influence can't be overstated. His economic policies were as ruthless as they were effective. He introduced a centralized administration and standardized weights and measures, small steps that had a colossal impact. He was the king of practical economics, ensuring that the empire's coffers were flush with cash. This wasn't some noble quest for equality. It was about stability and sustainability, even if that meant squeezing the populace like a lemon in a juicer. The Maurya Empire's rise wasn't just significant for its sheer size. It marked a shift in the political and social landscape of ancient India. Chandragupta's reign brought about a sense of unity that had been elusive for centuries. Before him, India was a patchwork of squabbling states, each with its own dialect and customs. After him, it was an empire that, at least on the surface, was united under one banner. Of course, this unity was more about pragmatic governance than brotherhood and harmony, but it was unity nonetheless. And then there's the story of Alexander the Great, who had ventured into India just before the Mauryan takeover. While he might have had visions of Indian conquest, his ambitions were cut short by his own troops' reluctance and the daunting Indian terrain, not to mention the armies that opposed him. After Alexander's retreat, his territories in India were left up for grabs, a situation Chandragupta astutely exploited. The power vacuum left behind by the Greeks was the perfect opportunity for someone with ambition and the right kind of guidance to step in. In the end, Chandragupta Maurya's rise was less about destiny and more about seizing opportunity by the horns. With a mentor like Chanakya and an empire ripe for the taking, he did what any pragmatic ruler would do. He took charge. The Maurya Empire stands as a testament to the fact that sometimes the right mix of ambition, strategy, and a little bit of luck can change the course of history. As for Chandragupta, he wasn't just the emperor of a vast empire. He was a symbol of what determination and a clever strategy could achieve in a world that was anything but predictable. Chandragupta Maurya's ascent was just the opening act. The real show began with the empire's day-to-day running, a saga of bureaucracy so meticulous would make even the most seasoned civil servants break into a sweat. You see, managing an empire wasn't just about planting flags and collecting shiny crowns. It was about making sure the whole machinery didn't collapse like a poorly assembled IKEA shelf. Enter the Mauryan administration, an intricate web of rules, regulations, and red tape that would put even the most elaborate board game to shame. Now, let's talk bureaucracy with a capital B. Chandragupta, with a little help from his brainy buddy Chanakya, rolled out an administrative system that could rival any modern government's efficiency. Think of it as the ancient precursor to your local DMV, minus the soul-crushing lines. At its core was the mantra that information is power. This wasn't just about keeping tabs on the empire's subjects. It was about knowing every nook and cranny of the vast territories they ruled over. And how did they do it, you ask? With the help of an early form of census-taking, a practice so ahead of its time would make even George Orwell nod in approval. Chandragupta's administration had a penchant for detail, and it showed. They gathered data on everything from cattle counts to crop yields, ensuring that they knew exactly what was where and who was doing what. This wasn't just idle curiosity. It was an economic necessity. With an empire stretching over 5 million square kilometers, knowing how many goats grazed in a field was as crucial as knowing the mood of the populace. Call it the ancient version of data analytics, without the fancy algorithms, but with all the precision. But wait, there's more. The Maurya Empire also boasted a spy network that would make James Bond feel like an amateur. These spies weren't just eavesdropping on juicy gossip. They were the eyes and ears of the administration, ensuring that no rebellion brewed without the Emperor getting wind of it first. This network of informants was as essential as it was secretive, providing Chandragupta with the intel needed to keep his empire running smoothly. If anyone thought they could plot a coup over a quiet cup of chai, they had another thing coming. Now, let's pivot to the economic engine that powered this well-oiled imperial machine. Trade was the lifeblood of the Maurya Empire, and they knew how to keep those trade routes buzzing like a beehive. The empire's geographical reach meant it was strategically positioned to control major trade routes, from the silk-clad merchants of Asia to the spice-laden ships heading to the Mediterranean. The Mauryas weren't just sitting on their laurels, they were actively engaging in commerce, ensuring a steady flow of wealth into their coffers. Taxes, of course, were a big part of keeping the lights on, and the Mauryas were nothing if not efficient tax collectors. The tax system was as comprehensive as it was relentless, with levies on everything from land to trading goods. But here's the kicker. It wasn't just about squeezing the populace dry. The Mauryan tax system was designed to be fair, ensuring that no one was overburdened, at least not too much. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required the finesse of a tightrope walker combined with the ruthlessness of a debt collector. In this grand tapestry of governance, the local administrators played their part too. These officials, stationed across the empire, were the unsung heroes, or villains, depending on who you ask, of the Mauryan administration. They were responsible for the nitty-gritty of governance, from ensuring law and order to collecting taxes. Think of them as the middle managers of the ancient world, crucial cogs in the vast machinery that kept the empire ticking along without a hitch. The Mauryan administration was more than just a collection of bureaucrats shuffling papyrus scrolls. It was a complex ecosystem that relied on a mix of human ingenuity and systematic processes to function. It was about creating a sense of order in a world that was anything but predictable. And while the romantic notion of a benevolent emperor overseeing his empire might be appealing, the reality was far more nuanced. The Mauryas knew that power wasn't just about having the biggest army. It was about having the most organized one. All this talk of administration and organization might sound a bit dull, but let's not forget the human element in this grand saga. People were at the heart of the Mauryan Empire, from the farmers tilling the fields to the merchants peddling their wares. The administration's policies, while designed to maintain order, also had a profound impact on the everyday lives of the empire's inhabitants. It wasn't just about governance. It was about creating a society where, ideally, people could thrive, or at least survive without too much grumbling. As we delve deeper into the inner workings of the Maurya Empire, it's clear that Chandragupta's legacy wasn't just about conquest. It was about creating a system that could sustain itself, an empire that could stand the test of time. The Mauryan blueprint for governance was as much about pragmatism as it was about power, a testament to the age-old adage that knowledge truly is power. And while the romanticized image of an emperor ruling with wisdom and benevolence might be tempting, the reality was a far more complex dance of power, politics, and practicality. So, as we wrap up this chapter of Chandragupta's story, remember that the real magic of the Maurya Empire wasn't just in its conquests. It was in the empire's ability to manage, govern, and thrive in a world where chaos was often the order of the day. And while the Mauryan administration might not make it to the top of your list of riveting historical tales, it stands as a reminder that sometimes the real story lies not in the battles fought, but in the systems built. Stay tuned, because this tale of ancient intrigue and ingenuity has only just begun. Just as the Mauryan administration was proving that bureaucracy could be as thrilling as a roller coaster through a paper factory, the empire's narrative took a dramatic turn with Ashoka, a ruler who made a pivot so sharp it could give you whiplash. Now, if Chandragupta was the empire's architect, Ashoka was its philosopher king, painted in a decidedly different hue. Born into a lineage of conquerors, Ashoka's early reign was all about extending the family portfolio, and extend it he did, until he hit the bloody wall that was the Kalinga War. The year was around 260 BCE, and Ashoka was riding high on a wave of military success. But the conquest of Kalinga, a region on the east coast of India, was to be his last hurrah. Picture a battlefield strewn with the bodies of over 100,000 soldiers and civilians, not exactly a scene from a triumphant epic. The numbers etched into history weren't just statistics. They were a grim reminder of the human cost of imperial ambition. The horror of it all shook Ashoka to his core, prompting a transformation that historians still debate to this day. Was it a genuine change of heart, or a savvy PR move to consolidate power? The eternal question of leaders with a conscience and a kingdom to run. This transformation wasn't just about a ruler looking in the mirror and deciding to turn over a new leaf. Ashoka's shift from ruthless conqueror to benevolent ruler was like swapping a sword for a scroll. He adopted Buddhism, a philosophy that emphasized nonviolence and compassion, and went on a crusade of kindness, but without the actual crusading, of course. And just like any influencer worth their salt, Ashoka needed a platform to broadcast his newfound values. Into the rock edicts, those ancient billboards that immortalized his messages across the empire. These stone proclamations were the Twitter threads of their time, going viral without the aid of hashtags. Now, these edicts didn't just pop up in one corner of the empire. Oh no, Ashoka made sure they were scattered from Afghanistan to southern India. Talk about a comprehensive ad campaign. Each rock and pillar carved with his decrees served as a testament to his commitment to Dharma, a concept that mingled duty, morality, and cosmic order into a palatable package for his subjects. The edicts urged people to live peacefully, respect all religions, and generally be better human beings. It was the ancient equivalent of a motivational poster, but with a bit more gravitas and a lot more stone. But let's pause and consider the skepticism that comes with any grand gesture. Some historians argue that Ashoka's embrace of Buddhism and nonviolence was less about spiritual awakening and more about political maneuvering. After all, promoting peace and religious tolerance could help stabilize a vast and diverse empire. It's like the old saying, sometimes the best way to keep control is to give it up, or at least pretend to. By advocating for a more harmonious society, Ashoka may have been shoring up the very foundation of his rule. If people were too busy meditating and being nice to each other, they might not notice the man behind the curtain. But regardless of his motivations, Ashoka's policies did have tangible effects on the empire. He invested in infrastructure, building roads and rest houses that made travel easier and trade more efficient. He also established hospitals and veterinary clinics, showing a level of public welfare that would make many modern governments blush. These initiatives weren't just about spreading goodwill. They were strategic moves to improve communication and economic stability across the empire. After all, a healthy and connected populace is less likely to revolt and more likely to pay their taxes. Ashoka's reign marked a departure from the blood-soaked pages of his predecessors. However, his legacy is a mixed bag, not unlike a historical grab bag filled with both treasures and trinkets. On one hand, his dedication to non-violence and religious tolerance stands as a beacon of enlightened rule in a time when might often made right. On the other, his drastic shift in governance left future Mauryan rulers with a blueprint that wasn't exactly user-friendly. The emperor's peaceful policies, while noble, may have inadvertently sown the seeds of decline by prioritizing compassion over consolidation. As we peel back the layers of Ashoka's story, we see a ruler grappling with the age-old tension between idealism and pragmatism. The edicts, while sincere, were not a magic wand that could erase the challenges of ruling an empire as sprawling as the Mauryan. The empire was a vast mosaic of cultures, languages, and religions, and Ashoka's rock-hewn messages were but one tool in his administrative toolkit. The reality of maintaining control over such a diverse realm required more than just good intentions. It required a delicate balance of carrot and stick. When Ashoka died, in 232 BCE, the empire faced the formidable task of continuing without his unique brand of leadership. His successors inherited an empire that was both enriched by his reforms and encumbered by his idealism. The Mauryan Empire would survive for a few more decades, but without Ashoka's strong hand and visionary policies, its unity began to fray like an old tapestry. The Mauryan experiment with governance had shown the world what was possible, but it also highlighted the precarious nature of holding together such a vast and varied empire. So, as we leave Ashoka's tale open-ended, poised for further exploration, remember this. In the grand theatre of history, leaders are often judged not just by their conquests, but by the legacies they leave behind. Ashoka's story is one that dances between legend and reality, offering lessons in the power of transformation and the price it sometimes demands. As we move forward, the echoes of his reign remind us that history is as much about the stories told in stone as it is about the truths hidden beneath the surface. Stay tuned, my friends, for the next act in this grand saga of strategy, ambition, and the eternal struggle for power. And so, the curtain rises on the next act of this grand historical drama, as we pivot from the enlightened reign of Ashoka to the murky waters that led to the decline of the mighty Maurya Empire. The transition wasn't exactly seamless, more akin to a baton handover where the runner trips over their own feet. Ashoka's successors were faced with the unenviable task of steering an empire that was as vast as it was varied, without the guiding light of a ruler who had, quite literally, carved his principles in stone. Unfortunately, their performance was less Oscar-winning and more akin to a high school production of Hamlet where half the cast forgets their lines. You see, Ashoka's successors inherited an empire that was, in many ways, a victim of its own success. The Mauryan Empire had expanded to cover a staggering 5 million square kilometers, stretching from the eastern fringes of Iran to the lush jungles of Bengal. This was a land where elephants roamed as freely as Ashoka's edicts. But managing such a sprawling empire is like trying to juggle flaming torches while riding a unicycle. One wrong move, and everything goes up in smoke. The centralized administration that had been so effective under Chandragupta and Ashoka was about as nimble as a glacier, and just as slow to adapt to the changing tides of political and social pressures. Let's talk numbers, because nothing spells trouble like a spreadsheet gone rogue. The empire's population was enormous, numbering in the tens of millions, a mosaic of cultures, languages, and religions. This diversity, while a source of strength, was also a brewing part of potential discord. The challenge was not just to govern this diversity, but to keep it united under a single banner, a task akin to herding cats, if the cats also spoke different dialects and had a penchant for rebellion. The Mauryan successors found themselves caught in a relentless game of whack-a-mole, trying to suppress regional uprisings with the finesse of a toddler wielding a mallet. Economically, the empire faced strains that would make any accountant break into a cold sweat. Trade was the lifeblood of the Mauryan economy, but maintaining the vast network of roads and trading posts required a steady influx of resources. The tax system, once the envy of the ancient world, became a double-edged sword. As the empire expanded, so did the cost of administration and defense, straining the treasury like an overworked mule. And just like that mule, there's only so much burden it can bear before it collapses under the weight. Meanwhile, regional powers began to rear their ambitious heads, sensing an opportunity to chip away at the Mauryan dominance. In the southwestern region of India, the Satavahanas began to consolidate power, while in the northwest, the Indo-Greeks saw a chance to reclaim lost territories. These emerging powers treated the Mauryan Empire like a buffet, helping themselves to whatever pieces they could grab. The central authority, once the ironclad fist of Chandragupta, was now more of a limp handshake, unable to enforce its will over the burgeoning regional states. Now, about those political missteps, let's just say the Mauryan rulers weren't exactly winning any popularity contests. Internal strife within the royal family proved to be as corrosive as rust on an old sword. Succession disputes became the norm, with rival factions vying for the throne like kids, squabbling over the last piece of cake. This infighting weakened the central authority, further eroding the unity that had been painstakingly built over generations. While Ashoka had tried to unify his empire through the soft power of Dharma, his successors discovered that good intentions weren't enough to hold an empire together when everyone was too busy stabbing each other in the back. Complicating matters further was the rise of new religious and philosophical movements that challenged the status quo. The slow but steady spread of Buddhism and Jainism, while initially bolstered by Ashoka's patronage, began to create fault lines within the empire's traditional Brahmanical order. The old guard, which had once wielded significant influence over the Mauryan administration, found themselves sidelined by these new ideologies. The tension between the old and the new was like a simmering volcano, periodically erupting in conflicts that drained the empire's resources and attention. But let's not dismiss the role of complacency in this grand unraveling. The Mauryan Empire, having reached the zenith of its power, suffered from a malaise that often accompanies prolonged success. It's the kind of complacency that whispers sweet nothings in your ear, telling you that everything is fine when, in fact, the foundation is crumbling beneath your feet. The administrators, once as sharp as the swords they wielded, became bogged down in the minutiae of governance, losing sight of the bigger picture. It was as if the empire was sleepwalking towards its own demise, lulled into a false sense of security by its past glories. By the time the last Mauryan emperor, Brihadratha, took the throne around 187 BCE, the empire was a shadow of its former self. His reign was marked by a desperate attempt to hold together the fraying ends of an empire that had once been the envy of the ancient world. But as history often teaches us, the center cannot hold when the periphery is in revolt. Brihadratha's rule ended in a classic tale of betrayal, orchestrated by his own general, Pushyamitra Shunga, who assassinated him in 180 BCE. Talk about a plot twist worthy of any political thriller. So there you have it, the decline of the Maurya Empire, a cautionary tale of overextension, internal discord and complacency. It's a narrative that underscores the harsh realities of empire building. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. The Maurya Empire, once a beacon of unity and power, became a fragmented landscape of regional kingdoms, each vying for its place in the sun. Yet, even as the empire crumbled, its legacy endured, influencing the political and cultural landscape of India for centuries to come. As we close this chapter, remember that history is a tapestry woven with both triumph and tragedy. The Maurya Empire, with its grand ambitions and equally grand failures, reminds us that even the most formidable empires are not immune to the forces of change. The story doesn't end here. My friends, there's more to uncover as we continue to explore the echoes of this ancient power and its enduring impact on the world. Stay tuned for the next installment, where we delve deeper into the ripple effects of the Mauryan legacy and the new powers that emerged from its ashes. And so, as the dust settled on the sprawling Maurya Empire's grand stage, what remained was a landscape forever altered by the titanic forces of ambition, power, and yes, a fair bit of chaos. While the empire itself may have crumbled into the history books like a great stone edifice succumbing to time, its legacy is anything but dust. The Mauryas left behind more than just ruins and ancient texts. They bequeathed a blueprint for governance and philosophical thought that continues to echo through the corridors of time. Let's start with governance, because if there's one thing the Mauryas knew how to do, it was run an empire with the kind of bureaucratic efficiency that would make even the most seasoned civil servant nod in appreciation. Their administrative innovations, from the establishment of a centralized government to the introduction of standardized weights and measures, weren't just about keeping the empire's massive machinery running smoothly. They set a precedent for future empires, laying the groundwork for a system that valued order, accountability, and a healthy dose of state surveillance. Fast forward to today, and you can see the shadows of Mauryan efficiency in modern governmental structures across the Indian subcontinent. The emphasis on a centralized authority and the reliance on a well-oiled administrative machine are concepts that still hold sway, proving that some ideas, much like a classic rock anthem, never really go out of style. But governance wasn't the only area where the Mauryas left their mark. Enter Ashoka, the emperor with a penchant for philosophy and a soft spot for Buddhism. His embrace of non-violence and religious tolerance wasn't just a personal epiphany. It was a cultural shift that rippled across the empire and beyond. Ashoka's promotion of Buddhism, combined with his rock edicts that preached peace and compassion, transformed a regional belief system into a major world religion. Today, Buddhism boasts hundreds of millions of followers worldwide, a testament to the enduring influence of Ashoka's reign. His legacy as a ruler who swapped conquest for contemplation has romanticized his story, casting him as a paragon of enlightened leadership. Yet, it's worth noting that Ashoka's pivot from military might to moral righteousness didn't just reshape his empire. It also set a global example for how power could be wielded with conscience. Now, let's talk myths, because what's history without a little embellishment? Mauryas, particularly Chandragupta and Ashoka, have been romanticized to the point where their stories border on legend. Chandragupta's rise from obscurity to emperor is often painted as a rags-to-riches tale, the quintessential underdog story. In reality, it was as much about strategic alliances and military might as it was about destiny. Likewise, Ashoka's transformation post-Kalinga is frequently depicted as a sudden awakening, a moment of divine clarity. While the dramatic pivot makes for a compelling narrative, the truth is likely more nuanced, involving calculated political maneuvering and a recognition of the benefits of a peaceful empire. These legends serve as powerful reminders of the human desire to see our leaders as larger-than-life figures, capable of transcending their flaws to become symbols of virtue and greatness. Economically, the Maurya Empire's legacy is equally profound. Their sophisticated trade networks, which linked the Indian subcontinent with distant lands, laid the foundation for a thriving economy that continued to flourish long after the empire's fall. The Mauryan emphasis on infrastructure, roads, rest houses, and ports facilitated trade and exchange, creating a vibrant economic landscape that will be inherited by succeeding powers. In many ways, the Mauryan commitment to commerce and connectivity set the stage for India's emergence as a major player in the global economy, a role it continues to play today. As we reflect on the Maurya Empire's legacy, we're reminded of the timeless dance between power, ambition, and human frailty. The Mauryas reached dizzying heights, only to be brought low by the very forces they sought to control. Their story is a poignant reminder of the impermanence of power and the often fickle nature of ambition. Yet, even in their fall, the Mauryas left behind a legacy that continues to shape the political, cultural, and economic fabric of India and beyond. Their innovations in governance, their philosophical contributions, and their role in shaping the contours of the ancient world are testaments to their enduring influence. In the grand tapestry of history, the Maurya Empire stands as a vibrant thread, weaving together themes of conquest, governance, and transformation. It's a story that resonates across the ages, inviting us to ponder the complexities of power and the legacies we leave behind. As we close the book on this chapter, we do so with the understanding that history is not just a record of what was, but a reflection of what is possible. The Mauryas taught us that empires may rise and fall, but their impact can echo through the ages, shaping the world in ways both seen and unseen. So, let's raise a metaphorical toast to the Mauryas, whose story reminds us that while the dance of history is eternal, each step leaves an indelible mark on the world stage. If you had the chance to teleport to Tenochtitlan in the 15th century, you'd find yourself in a world with a social hierarchy as rigid as a stone temple. At the top were the Pippletin, the nobles who lived as if they were the Kardashians of the Aztec Empire, minus the reality TV. They strutted around in feathered capes and sipped on cocoa like it was the elixir of immortality. By the way, cocoa wasn't just a drink, it was currency. Imagine that. Today, you can barely buy a decent latte without selling a kidney. But back then, a cup of cocoa was literally like holding a wallet. Below these feathered fashionistas were the Mace-Hualtin, the commoners who kept the wheels of the empire turning. They were the farmers, the builders, the soldiers, the backbone of society who made sure the nobles had the luxury to ponder life's great mysteries, like which shade of feather matched their sandals. Yes, the Pippletin had it good. They were the lucky 1%, born with a silver macuahuil in their hands. Now, let's dig into the nitty-gritty of noble life. These Pippletin had privileges that would make even the most pampered modern celebrity blush. They lived in palatial homes adorned with intricate murals and stone carvings. Their clothing was a statement piece, made from fine cotton and bedecked with exotic feathers. If you were a Pippletin, you didn't just walk, you glided, probably because you had someone else doing the walking for you. The nobles also had the monopoly on education and governance, often serving as priests, judges, and high-ranking warriors. They were the brain trust of the empire, which, let's be honest, is a bit like letting the board of directors run the school play. But not everything was sunshine, and cocoa beans for these upper crusts. Nobles had to maintain their status through displays of valor and wit. They were expected to attend lavish ceremonies, and engage in elaborate rituals that would make a modern-day influencer's content calendar look like child's play. It was all about keeping up appearances, and the stakes were high. Imagine a world where missing a sacrificial ceremony could mean losing your front row seat at the next ball game. That's pressure. On the flip side, the Mace-Hualtin were the unsung heroes, the worker bees who didn't get the credit they deserved. They toiled in the fields, crafted exquisite pottery, and built monumental structures like the great Temple of Tenochtitlan. Their lives were governed by duty and hard work, with little room for the opulence enjoyed by their noble counterparts. But let's not sugarcoat it. Being a commoner wasn't all doom and gloom. They had their own vibrant communities, celebrated festivals, and a sense of camaraderie that perhaps the aloof nobles missed out on. Plus, they had the satisfaction of knowing that without their labor, the whole grand empire would collapse like a poorly constructed pyramid. Now, here's where the absurdity of Aztec social dynamics really shines through. The Pipiltin had the exclusive right to wear certain types of clothing and adornments, like those famous feathered capes. In modern terms, it's a bit like saying only CEOs can wear Gucci, while the rest of us are stuck in off-brand sweatpants. And the cocoa currency, that was the cherry on top of this bizarre social sundae. Cocoa beans were so valuable that they could be used to pay taxes, buy slaves, or even trade for goods. So, if you were a noble and had a sweet tooth, you were literally sitting on a fortune. The Aztec social hierarchy wasn't just about who got to wear the fanciest feathers. It was a complex system that dictated every aspect of life, from what you wore to where you lived, and even how you were buried. And while we might chuckle at the idea of feathered capes and cocoa as currency, it's important to remember that these were symbols of power and prestige, deeply ingrained in the cultural fabric of the time. In the end, the Aztec social hierarchy was as much about control as it was about privilege. The Pipiltin maintained their status not just through wealth, but through religious and military power. Meanwhile, the Mace-Hualtin, despite their lower status, were essential to the empire's survival. They were the ones who made the dream of a mighty Aztec civilization a reality. It was a system that worked, until it didn't, thanks to a certain group of Europeans with a penchant for conquest. But that's a story for another day. For now, let's just appreciate the fact that in the grand tapestry of history, the Aztec social hierarchy stands out as a vivid example of how power, privilege, and duty can shape a civilization. But we're just getting started with the Aztec social pyramid of power. At its apex, reigning supreme like a sun-drenched colossus, was the Huey-Tlatoni, the great speaker, or as we might call him today, the world's most powerful influencer without a TikTok account. Picture a leader who was as much spiritual icon as political powerhouse, his existence steeped in rituals that could make even the most extravagant Met Gala look like a casual backyard BBQ. This guy wasn't just any ruler. He was seen as a semi-divine figure, which, let's face it, is a pretty sweet gig if you can get it. The Huey-Tlatoni was said to be chosen by the gods, which conveniently translated to him having a say in pretty much everything that mattered. From declaring wars to overseeing religious ceremonies, he was the living embodiment of the Aztec universe's order, a celestial CEO, if you will. The emperor's word was law, and his life was a whirlwind of ceremonies, with each one more elaborate than the last. Think of it as the ultimate PR campaign, except instead of brand partnerships, he was dealing in sacrificial tributes and cosmic balance. But before you get too green-eyed over his divine status, let's debunk the myth of this all-powerful ruler. Sure, he was the top dog, but even the mightiest have their fleas. The Aztec Empire was a complex beast. Holding it together was no easy feat, and the emperor was always a heartbeat away from a political migraine. Rebellions were a constant threat, and succession battles were as common as weather changes. In fact, the choice of a new Huey-Tlatoni was no simple matter of primogeniture. Oh no, it involved a council of nobles and priests who might have had more opinions than a modern-day focus group. Imagine trying to maintain your godly composure while your job security is perpetually in the hands of a board meeting. And as if the political roller coaster wasn't thrilling enough, there was the little matter of the emperor's ceremonial duties. We're talking rituals that involved everything from bloodletting to elaborate dances. For the Huey-Tlatoni, keeping the universe in balance wasn't just a metaphor. It was a literal, everyday job description. One wrong move in these rituals, and you'd have a celestial HR issue on your hands. Plus, the emperor had to keep up appearances. His wardrobe was a statement in itself, featuring the most opulent garments, steeped in symbolism, and quite possibly a significant chunk of the empire's textile budget. The court of the Huey T. Latoni was a spectacle to behold, a kaleidoscope of colors, sounds, and hierarchies. Picture grand palaces where everything from the architecture to the tapestries was meant to reflect the empire's might. The emperor's residence wasn't just a home. It was a stage where the drama of politics and religion played out daily. Nobles and courtiers attended to the emperor's every need, ensuring that the gears of this grand imperial machine turned smoothly, or at least appeared to. It was a bit like managing a high-stakes juggling act, where even the slightest misstep could send everything tumbling. And let's not forget the emperor's role as the ultimate influencer of his time. His reach extended across the empire, from the bustling markets of Tenochtitlan to the far-flung tribute states that kept the empire's coffers brimming. The Huey T. Latoni's image was carefully curated, his every action scrutinized and emulated. His ability to project power and maintain the illusion of control was crucial to the empire's stability. But behind the scenes, it was a delicate dance of diplomacy, alliances, and occasionally brute force. Despite the grandeur and the near-divine status, the emperor's life was not without its challenges. Rebellions simmered in the provinces, like a pot perpetually on the verge of boiling over. The Huey T. Latoni had to be as much a military strategist as a spiritual leader, knowing when to wield the sword and when to offer a diplomatic olive branch. It was a tightrope walk between maintaining the empire's integrity and ensuring his own survival. After all, even divine favor has its limits, and the Aztec emperor knew that his rule was contingent upon both celestial and earthly alliances. Succession was another thorny issue, with potential heirs often embroiled in power struggles that could rival any soap opera plot. The process of choosing a successor was fraught with tension, as noble families jostled for influence and favor. The emperor had to navigate these treacherous waters carefully, balancing the interests of various factions while ensuring the continuity of his lineage. It was a game of political chess, where every move counted and every ally could become a rival at a moment's notice. So, was the Huey T. Latoni truly the all-powerful ruler that legend suggests? Well, yes and no. While he held immense authority and commanded respect throughout the empire, his power was not absolute. He was as much a prisoner of the system as he was its master, constantly working to maintain the delicate equilibrium that kept the Aztec world spinning. The emperor's life was one of paradoxes, a blend of divine reverence and political pragmatism, opulent ceremonies and harsh realities. In the end, the Aztec emperor was a figure of both mythic proportions and very real limitations. His role was as much about managing perceptions as it was about wielding power. The Huey T. Latoni had to be a master of both ceremony and strategy, a leader who could inspire awe and command loyalty. Yet, beneath the veneer of divine authority, he was a man navigating the complex currents of Aztec politics, a mortal figure striving to maintain an empire's grandeur in a world full of uncertainties. And as we ponder the legacy of these ancient rulers, it becomes clear that their stories are as much about the human condition as they are about the divine. Just when you thought we'd exhausted the intrigue of Aztec society, with divine emperors and cocoa-hoarding nobles, let me introduce you to the Parchdecker, the unsung heroes of the Aztec economic machine. These were not your average street market vendors hawking trinkets. Oh no, the Parchdecker were the business moguls of the Aztec world, more Mark Cuban than merchant cart. They were the lifeblood of the empire's economy, traversing the vast reaches of Mesoamerica with the kind of grit that would make even the most seasoned Silicon Valley entrepreneur break a sweat. The Parchdecker were no strangers to the grind, as they monopolized trade routes that stretched from the Yucatan Peninsula to the Gulf of Mexico and beyond. Picture them as the FedEx of the Aztec Empire, but with a penchant for high-stakes diplomacy and a dash of espionage. They dealt in everything from precious Quetzal feathers to cacao, which, remember, was worth its weight in gold. These traders had access to goods that would make any noble swoon. Jade, obsidian, and exotic animal skins were just a few items in their extensive inventory. But their true power lay not in their wares, but in their strategic prowess. Now, let's talk numbers. The Parchdecker were organized into guild-like structures, each with its own hierarchy and specialization, employing hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals. They weren't just savvy businessmen. They were also the Empire's unofficial intelligence operatives. While they traded goods, they also gathered information about foreign lands and potential threats to the Empire. Think James Bond meets Wall Street. Their reports were crucial for the Aztec rulers, providing insights into political climates and military capabilities of neighboring regions. These traders were the eyes and ears of the Empire, and they wielded their influence with a deft hand. But don't let the romantic notion of a merchant spy fool you. The life of a Parchdecker was fraught with danger. The journeys were perilous, often taking them through hostile territories where betrayal could be lurking around any corner. A failed trading mission could spell disaster not just for the Parchdecker, but for the larger economic stability of the Empire. And let's not forget the cutthroat nature of their business. Competition was fierce, and alliances were as volatile as the Aztec weather. Despite these challenges, the Parchdecker carved out a niche for themselves that was both respected and feared. Their economic clout allowed them to influence not just trade policies, but also diplomatic relations. They played a pivotal role in the Aztec tribute system, negotiating terms with subordinate states and ensuring the continuous flow of goods and wealth into Tenochtitlan. They were the ultimate middlemen, turning a tidy profit while ensuring the Empire's coffers remained full to the brim. Yet, the myth of the benevolent merchant glosses over the harsh realities of their profession. While they were instrumental in diplomacy, they were also enforcers of the Aztec economic order. Their power could be used to strong-arm neighboring regions into compliance, often with little regard for the consequences. This duality made them both indispensable and dangerous, a necessary cog in the imperial machine, yet always at risk of becoming a scapegoat should things go awry. The Parchdecker also had their own social hierarchy, with top-tier merchants enjoying privileges that rivaled those of the lower nobility. They lived in spacious homes, wore luxurious clothing, and had access to education that was usually reserved for the elite. This upward mobility was a testament to their economic prowess, but it also came with strings attached. They were expected to finance religious festivals and contribute to public works, a reminder that their success was always at the mercy of the state. In the grand narrative of Aztec society, the Parchdecker were the ultimate outsiders who managed to carve out a place for themselves at the top of the social ladder. They were the embodiment of ambition, their lives a delicate balance between opportunity and peril. And while their legacy is often overshadowed by the more glamorous tales of emperors and warriors, the Parchdecker were the true power brokers behind the scenes. So, as we continue our journey through the labyrinthine corridors of Aztec society, remember that beneath the feathers and cocoa beans lies a world of commerce and cunning. The Parchdecker were not mere traders. They were the lifeblood of an empire, navigating a complex web of politics and power with the precision of a surgeon. And as we peel back the layers of their story, we uncover the real force that fueled the mighty Aztec civilization, a testament to the timeless power of trade and the indomitable spirit of those who dared to dream beyond their station. But hold tight, there's more intrigue to unpack in the world of the Aztecs as we delve deeper into the affairs of this ancient civilization. The Parchdecker may have been the Empire's secret weapon, but they were far from the only players in this high-stakes game. As we explore further, we'll discover how the intricate dance of politics and power shaped an empire that, despite its eventual fall, remains one of history's most fascinating enigmas. Now, if you think the Parchdecker were the only ones playing high-stakes games in the Aztec Empire, wait until you meet the warriors. These guys were the rock stars of their time, but instead of smashing guitars, they were out there smashing skulls. And you could say the stage was a bit different too, more battlefield than bandstand. In the Aztec world, warriors weren't just fighters. They were living, breathing symbols of power and prestige. They were the Empire's PR campaign, wielding their macuahuitls like Instagram influencers wielding hashtags. Let's start with the cream of the crop, the Jaguar and Eagle warriors. These elite fighters were the Navy SEAL of the Aztec military, clad in uniforms that were more couture than combat-ready. Jaguar warriors donned spotted suits made from actual jaguar pelts, striding into battle as if they were on a savage ex-Fenty runway. Eagle warriors, not to be outdone, sported feathered helmets that screamed, I'm here to conquer your city and look fabulous doing it. And while their outfits were fierce, their training was even fiercer. Becoming one of these elite warriors required capturing a set number of enemies alive. No easy feat when everyone else is trying to do the same to you. Now, here's a fun fact. The Aztecs were all about capturing, not killing. Why? Because prisoners were prime stock for sacrificial ceremonies, the kind of events that kept the universe ticking and the guards happy, or so they believed. It was like a grim version of The Bachelor, where instead of a rose, the winners got the opportunity to meet their maker in the afterlife. For the Aztecs, capturing an enemy was proof of skill, a badge of honor that could elevate a common soldier to the ranks of the elite. But before you think these warriors were just in it for the glory, let's talk about the perks and the risks. Successful warriors were rewarded with land, fancy clothes, and even tax exemptions. Yes, landing a spot as an elite warrior was like hitting the medieval lottery. You'd be showered with accolades and receive a slice of nobility without being born into it. However, this grand prize came with a catch: the constant threat of death. Aztec warfare was brutal, and the life expectancy of a warrior was about as long as a snowball's chance in Tenochtitlan. Despite the high stakes, the allure of becoming a warrior was palpable. Young Aztec boys were trained from an early age to aspire to this warrior status. They were taught the art of combat, endurance, and strategy. And if the promise of social mobility wasn't enough, there was always the chance to become a hero, a legend immortalized in song and story. It was like being told you could be the next Marvel superhero, with the added bonus of having an actual guard or two on your side. However, the romanticized image of the Aztec warrior is only half the story. The reality was a grueling life of constant training, harsh discipline, and the ever-present specter of sacrifice. Warriors lived by a code that demanded loyalty, bravery, and the willingness to lay down their lives for the glory of the empire. There was no room for weakness, no second chances. You were either a victor or a victim, a hero or a human sacrifice. But let's not forget the common soldiers, the unsung heroes who filled the ranks and bore the brunt of the battles. These men were the backbone of the Aztec military, fighting in the trenches and paving the way for the more glamorous jaguar and eagle warriors. They were the foot soldiers, the grunts who did the dirty work while the elites grabbed the headlines. And while they might not have had the fancy costumes or the prestige, they shared the same risks and the same drive for glory. The common soldier's life was tough, to say the least. They were often conscripted from the ranks of the Mace-Hualtin, commoners who already had their hands full keeping the empire running. When not at war, these soldiers returned to their daily grind, farming, building, and contributing to the Aztec economy. But when duty called, they were expected to leave it all behind, picking up their weapons and marching into battle with nothing but a promise of honor to sustain them. So, was it worth it? The potential rewards were great, but so were the risks. For many, the dream of rising through the ranks, of capturing the enemy and earning a place among the elite, was an irresistible temptation. Yet for others, the brutal reality of war was a constant reminder of the harsh world they lived in. The Aztec warriors might have been the poster children of the empire, but behind the masks and the feathers lay real people, grappling with the same fears and hopes that have driven soldiers throughout history. As we delve deeper into the role of warriors in Aztec society, it becomes clear that their story is a microcosm of the empire itself, a tale of ambition, power, and the eternal struggle for survival. They were the embodiment of Aztec ideals, a living testament to the empire's strength and resilience. But they were also human, navigating a world of uncertainty and danger, where one misstep could mean the difference between life and death. In this world of warriors and warfare, the line between legend and reality blurs, leaving us with a complex tapestry of human experience. The Aztec warriors were more than just fighters. They were symbols of a civilization that, despite its eventual fall, continues to captivate our imagination. And as we peel back the layers of their story, we uncover a deeper understanding of the human condition, a testament to the enduring power of courage, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of glory. But hold on. The saga doesn't end here. There are more layers to uncover, more stories to tell as we journey further into the heart of the Aztec Empire. So stay tuned, because the intrigue of this ancient civilization is far from over. As we peel back the layers of Aztec society, it's time to shine a spotlight on the often overlooked roles of women and slaves. the unsung heroes and underdogs in this grand historical drama. And believe me, their stories are anything but mundane. If you thought the Pippleton or the Parchdecker had it tough, wait until you hear about the daily grind and unexpected influence of these groups. Let's start with Aztec women, who, contrary to popular myth, were not merely passive figures wading in the wings. They were the backbone of the domestic sphere, weaving the threads of society, quite literally. Women were responsible for producing the textiles that clothed the empire, a task so essential that it was considered a sacred duty. If you were a woman in Tenochtitlan, your life was a constant cycle of weaving, cooking, and raising children. Yet, this wasn't just about keeping the household running. It was a significant economic contribution. The production of textiles was a major industry, and women's work helped fuel the Aztec economy. Think of them as the original cottage industry moguls, minus the Etsy shop. Marriage was a strategic affair, and women had a say in their matrimonial destiny, a reality that might surprise those who imagine Aztec society as strictly patriarchal. Marriage wasn't just a personal union. It was a political alliance, a merger of families that could bolster social standing. Women managed the household finances, a role that gave them a surprising amount of influence. They were the CFOs of their domain, balancing the books with an eye for frugality and efficiency that would make any modern accountant proud. But let's not paint too rosy a picture. The reality was that women's lives were often restricted by societal expectations. They were bound by tradition and the ever-watchful eye of a society that valued them primarily as caretakers. Yet within these confines, women carved out spaces of autonomy. Some became priestesses, wielding spiritual authority that could sway public opinion and affect political decisions. Others thrived as midwives and healers, roles that commanded respect and demonstrated their indispensable value to the community. The myth of the powerless Aztec woman crumbles when you consider the many ways they subtly shaped the world around them. Now, onto the topic of slavery, a subject that tends to be swept under the historical rug. Slavery in the Aztec Empire was a complex institution, more nuanced than the brutal systems of the later colonial period. Slaves, or tlacatin, weren't just faceless laborers. They had rights and could even own property. And here's a kicker. Slavery wasn't always a lifelong sentence. It was possible to work your way out of bondage, making the Aztec system more of a debtor's prison than a life sentence. Imagine being in a perpetual installment plan with your freedom on the line. Slavery was often a consequence of warfare, indebtedness, or crime. If you were captured in battle, you might find yourself a slave, but you weren't necessarily doomed to it forever. A slave could buy their freedom, and children of slaves were born free, a glimmer of social mobility in an otherwise rigid hierarchy. Some slaves even ascended to positions of influence, their skills and loyalty earning them a place in the households of the nobility. It's a narrative twist worthy of a redemption arc in any good drama. But let's not romanticize it too much. The life of a slave was harsh, filled with backbreaking labor and the whims of masters who could be as capricious as they were powerful. Slaves were the workforce behind the grand infrastructure projects, the anonymous hands that built the temples and maintained the fields. Their contributions were critical, yet their recognition was minimal. It's a sobering reminder of how the engines of empire often run on the toil of the marginalized. In reflecting on the broader Aztec social hierarchy, one can't help but see parallels with modern society. The dynamics of power and privilege, the tension between the elite and the laborers, echo through time. The Aztecs had their Huey Tlatoni, their noble Pippleton, their industrious Parchdecker, and their resilient Mace Hualtin. Today, we see similar stratifications, though the feathered capes and cocoa beans have been swapped for stock options and designer suits. Aztec society was a living, breathing organism, complex and multifaceted, shaped by the contributions of every layer within it. The warriors, the women, the slaves, all played their parts in a grand historical symphony. Their stories remind us that history is not just the tale of emperors and conquests, but of every individual who lived, worked, and dreamed within that world. In the end, the Aztec Empire was a testament to the indomitable human spirit, a civilization that thrived on both its grandeur and its grit. It was a world where power was as much a performance as it was a reality, where every person, from the highest noble to the humblest slave, had a role to play. And as we draw this narrative to a close, it's clear that the legacy of the Aztecs is not just in their monumental architecture or their complex social structures, but in their enduring ability to captivate our imagination and illuminate the timeless dance of power and humanity. In the grand tapestry of history, where marble melts into myth and logic, occasionally takes a coffee break, ancient Greek architecture stands as a testament to human audacity. We're talking temples so precisely crafted that they'd make a modern laser look like a blunt crayon. Let's kick things off with the Parthenon, the prima donna of Greek temples, strutting atop the Acropolis since 447 BC. Now, if you think this is just another pile of old rocks, think again. This is the OG of architectural swagger, built at the behest of Pericles, who wasn't just any statesman but the Steve Jobs of ancient Athens, always pushing for that next big thing. The Parthenon wasn't just about aesthetics, though let's face it, it was a jaw-dropper. This iconic temple was a statement, a marble mic drop proclaiming Athens' dominance, both politically and culturally. It was a time when Greece was flexing its muscles, and the Parthenon was the gym they were showing off. The structure itself, designed by the dynamic duo Ictinus and Callicrates, was a marvel of precision. Think of it this way. The columns are slightly curved, not because these early architects were into wonky designs, but to counteract optical illusions. Those ancient Greeks were so detail-oriented that they added a slight bulge to the columns, known as intarses, making them appear straight to the human eye. They were the original masters of optical trickery, long before Photoshop was a glint in anyone's eye. Let's talk numbers, because in ancient Greece, numbers weren't just for mathematicians and tax collectors. The Parthenon measured about 69, 5 meters in length and 30, 9 meters in width, with 46 outer columns and 19 inner ones. Not that anyone was counting, but if you were, you'd have noticed how these columns stood like soldiers in formation, each meticulously crafted to support not just the roof, but the weight of a burgeoning empire's expectations. And let's not forget the cost. This wasn't a budget-friendly endeavor. Funded by the Delian League's treasury, which was supposed to be for defense against the Persians, the Parthenon was a bit of a financial sleight of hand. It was like using your kids' college fund to build a swimming pool and then throwing a toga party to celebrate. Now, you might be wondering about the purpose of this architectural masterpiece. Was it a glorified art gallery, a divine heirloom for Athena? Well, it was primarily a temple dedicated to Athena Parthenos, the city's patron goddess. But it was also a treasury, a place where Athens could flaunt its wealth and artistic prowess. The Parthenon was adorned with sculptures by Phidias, whose talent was as legendary as his ego. His statue of Athena, made from gold and ivory, was the cherry on top. Standing at 12 meters high, it was less a sculpture and more a skyscraper of the ancient world. But let's cut through the romanticized marble and get to the gritty reality. Ancient Greek architecture wasn't all about beauty and grace. It was also about power, politics, and a dash of divine intervention. The Parthenon, while a symbol of cultural zenith, was also a monument to Athens' imperial ambitions. It was a physical manifestation of the city's hegemony over the Greek world, a reminder to friends and foes alike of where the power lay. And while we might gush over the aesthetics today, back then, it was as much a political statement as a religious one. Speaking of debunking myths, let's address the idea that the Greeks were all about white marble and clean lines. Spoiler alert, they weren't. The Parthenon and other temples were originally painted in vibrant colors, a riot of reds, blues, and golds. They were less about the minimalist elegance we associate with Greek architecture, and more about making a bold statement. So, next time you see a pristine white replica, remember it's about as accurate as a black and white rainbow. In conclusion, the Parthenon is proof that beneath the layers of myth and marble lies a complex tapestry of human ambition, religious devotion, and political maneuvering. It's a reminder that history, much like architecture, is rarely as straightforward as it seems. And as we dive deeper into the world of ancient Greek architecture, keep in mind that every temple tells a story, not just of gods and heroes, but of the people who built them and the world they lived in. If the Parthenon is a monument to audacious ambition, then its construction was a masterclass in ancient economics, one that might make our modern accountants break out in a cold sweat. You see, Behind that gleaming facade of marble and myth was a financial operation that would make Wall Street look like child's play. Forget the idea of Athens as a democratic utopia where everyone pitched in with a smile. Building the Parthenon was more like a high-stakes poker game where the house always wins, and the house, in this case, was the Athenian elite. So, let's talk drachmas and denarii, because building such an architectural marvel didn't come cheap. The Parthenon cost around 469 talents to construct, a figure that might sound like monopoly money to us, but back in the day, it was the GDP of a small city-state. To give you an idea, 1 talent weighed about 26 kilograms and was worth the equivalent of a skilled worker's salary for 10 years. Imagine plopping down 10 years of your salary to buy a single share in the Parthenon's construction. That's the kind of financial gymnastics we're talking about. The money primarily came from the Delian League's treasury, initially intended for defense against the Persians. But in a classic Bedtime switch, Athens redirected those funds to build their marble masterpiece. It was like using your emergency fund to buy a yacht. Impressive, but not exactly the original plan. This sleight of hand shows that Athenian democracy had its fair share of smoke and mirrors, with Pericles as the ringmaster, pulling strings behind the scenes. Now, let's dive into the nuts and bolts, or rather, the stone and sweat, of the construction itself. Labor was the unsung hero of this entire saga. Picture an eclectic mix of slaves, skilled artisans, and day laborers, all working under the scorching Greek sun. The masons who shaped those massive stones were the rock stars of their day, literally chiseling their way into history. But here's the kicker. While the talent pool was diverse, the paychecks weren't exactly flying off the shelves. Most of the laborers were enslaved individuals or lower-class citizens who were paid a pittance compared to the elite architects and overseers. So, the Parthenon was less a labor of love and more a testament to the social stratification that underpinned Athenian society. And while we're busting myths, let's address the notion of democracy in action. Yes, Athens was the cradle of democracy, but when it came to public works, it was more of an oligarchic affair. Decision-making power lay firmly in the hands of the wealthy and influential. The average Athenian might have had a say in smaller civic matters, but when it came to building colossal temples, the big wigs called the shots. It was democracy with a small d, or perhaps more accurately, democracy with an asterisk. The economic impact of such colossal projects was profound. They weren't just about flexing cultural muscles. They were an ancient version of a stimulus package, pumping money into the local economy and providing jobs, albeit at varying levels of compensation. It was a strategic move that kept the populace occupied and the economy humming, while also serving as a constant reminder of Athenian dominance. A win-win for those at the top, if not necessarily for everyone else. And then there's the question of resources. The Parthenon was constructed primarily from Pentelic marble, quarried from the mountains of Attica. This wasn't just any marble. It was the creme de la creme, known for its pure white appearance and fine grain. Hauling this prized material from the quarries to the Acropolis was no small feat. It involved a logistical operation worthy of a military campaign, with oxen-drawn carts and a small army of workers paving the way. But the choice of such luxurious materials was no accident. It was a deliberate statement of wealth and power, a reminder to the world that Athens was not to be trifled with. These grandiose projects also served as a form of soft power, a way to project influence without the need for swords and shields. The Parthenon wasn't just a temple. It was a billboard advertising Athenian greatness, with every column and frieze shouting, "Look at us, we're the best." It's a strategy that echoes through time, from the pyramids of Egypt to the skyscrapers of modern cities. Build it big, build it beautiful, and they will come. Tourists, admirers, and allies alike. But let's not gloss over the darker side of this economic engine. The funds funneled into the Parthenon's construction were often extracted from Athens' allies, who weren't exactly thrilled to see their hard-earned tributes turned into someone else's monument. It was one part empire building, one part artistic endeavor, and all parts controversial. The resentment brewed quietly beneath the surface, a simmering tension that would eventually contribute to the fraying of the Delian League and Athens' eventual decline. In summary, the Parthenon wasn't just a temple. It was an economic juggernaut, a political chess piece, and a social statement all rolled into one. The labor and resources poured into its creation tell a story of ambition and exploitation, triumph and tension. Behind every column lies a tale not just of divine dedication, but of human endeavor, driven by motives as varied as the stones themselves. And while we might marvel at its beauty today, it pays to remember that this ancient wonder was built on the backs of many who never received their due. An eternal reminder that history, much like architecture, is often built on complex foundations. Let's shift our gaze from the marble temples to the bustling theaters of ancient Greece, the original Netflix of the ancient world, where binge-watching involved sandals and stone seats instead of sweatpants and a sofa. If you think modern theaters are impressive with their reclining chairs and surround sound, wait until you hear about the acoustics of the Greek amphitheaters. So precise, they could make a whisper sound like a shout. Take the theater of Epidaurus, for example. Built in the 4th century BC, this architectural wonder could seat up to 14,000 spectators, all of whom could hear every word spoken on stage. And we're not talking about microphones or electronic wizardry. This was pure architectural genius. The theater's design, with its perfect semicircular shape and limestone seats, enhanced sound like a natural amplifier. The Greeks were essentially the original sound engineers, long before anyone even thought of plugging in a speaker. But why were these theaters such a big deal? Well, for the ancient Greeks, theater wasn't just entertainment, it was a civic duty, a form of mass communication, and perhaps most importantly, a political arena. Think of playwrights like Aristophanes as the Jon Stewarts of their time. Their comedies and tragedies were less about popcorn munchies and more about delivering powerful, sometimes controversial messages. In a society where free speech was a fledgling concept, the stage was one of the few places where criticism of leaders and policies could be aired without immediate repercussion. Well, at least not publicly. Now, before you start romanticizing this as some ancient utopia of free expression, let's inject a dose of reality. Sure, playwrights could tackle issues like war, politics, and social norms, but they had to tread carefully. The plays were often laced with allegory and satire rather than direct criticism, allowing playwrights to slip in under the radar of potential censorship. It was as much about what wasn't said as what was, a delicate dance of words that could make or break careers. The economic impact of these theaters was also no small fry. Hosting festivals like the Dionysia, named after Dionysus, the god of wine and theater, was a massive undertaking. It was part cultural celebration, part economic stimulus. Wealthy citizens, known as Korgoi, sponsored these plays, funding everything from costumes to chorus training. It was a bit like ancient crowdfunding, with the added incentive of earning civic glory and perhaps a few political favors down the line. Even in ancient Greece, money talked, loudly. Let's not gloss over who actually had leisure time to attend these events. The audiences were primarily composed of male citizens, privileged free men who had the time to spare. Women and slaves, meanwhile, were largely left out of the equation, reminding us that ancient Greece, while advanced in many ways, had its fair share of social hierarchies and exclusions. And here's where the politics really cranked up the drama. The theater was a melting pot of ideas, a place where social norms could be challenged and political winds tested. It was a clever way for leaders to gauge public sentiment. Think of it as an ancient opinion poll with a side of wine and olives. The themes explored in plays often mirrored the political climate, providing a safe space to explore what could not be openly discussed. Take the famous play Lysistrata by Aristophanes, which was essentially a comedic call for peace during the Peloponnesian War. In this play, the women of Greece band together to withhold, let's call it marital relations, until the men agreed to cease fighting. It's a plot ripe with humor, but also a biting critique of the endless conflict, showing just how powerful and subversive theater could be. But let's not get carried away with the notion of ancient Greece as a theater-loving utopia. The reality was that these festivals, while culturally significant, were also a means of reinforcing social cohesion and state ideology. The plays often celebrated themes of civic duty, religious piety, and unity, subtly nudging citizens towards the virtues the state wanted to promote. So, while there was room for dissent, it was always within the framework of what was ultimately state-sanctioned entertainment. The construction of these theaters, much like the temples, was a testament to Greek engineering prowess. The theatre at Delphi, for instance, was carved into the slope of Mount Parnassus, providing not just acoustical brilliance, but also breathtaking views that would make any Instagram influencer weep with jealousy. These structures were typically built into hillsides, utilizing the natural landscape to create seating terraces, an ingenious method that maximized both space and sound. And then there were the economic ripples. Just like the Parthenon, these theaters were a boon for local economies. They attracted visitors from across the Greek world, boosting trade and commerce. Vendors would sell food, drink, and trinkets outside, turning each festival into a marketplace of ideas and goods. It was a win-win for local merchants and the city-state's coffers. But let's bring it back to the human element, the stories unfolded on these stages that have echoed through time. The tragedies of Sophocles, the comedies of Aristophanes, and the dramas of Euripides weren't just tales told to while away the hours. They were reflections of the human condition, explorations of morality, power, and the gods' whims. These plays were ancient mirrors held up to society, showing its beauty and its warts with equal clarity. In sum, Greek theatres were more than stone seats and dramatic masks. They were crucibles of culture, politics, and economy, a reminder that even in the past, entertainment was never just about escape. It was about engagement, reflection, and sometimes good old-fashioned critique of those in power. As we prepare to delve deeper into the wonders of Greek architecture, let's remember that every stone tells a story. Every echo on the stage holds a whisper of history, waiting for the next act to begin. You know, as much as we romanticize the ancient Greeks for their architectural brilliance and philosophical musings, living in those days was less idyllic and more real-life game of survival. Sure, they had their temples and theaters, but what about the nitty-gritty of day-to-day life? Let's face it, the grandeur of the Parthenon didn't exactly extend to the plumbing. Take a stroll through an ancient Greek marketplace, the Agora, and you'd find it bustling with activity. It was the beating heart of the city, where citizens gathered not just to trade goods, but also gossip, philosophize, and occasionally hatch political schemes. Picture it as a combination of a farmer's market, town square, and social media feed, minus the Wi-Fi, of course. Forget about strolling through pristine marble streets. The ground was more likely a charming mix of dirt, animal droppings, and the occasional discarded olive pit. Add in the cacophony of haggling merchants and bleeding goats, and you've got yourself an ancient symphony that would make Mozart wince. And speaking of olives, these little gems were the lifeblood of Greek cuisine and economy. Olive oil was the ancient Greek equivalent of duct tape, indispensable and used for everything from cooking to cleaning wounds. The Greeks might not have invented the Mediterranean diet, but they sure gave it a solid foundation. But don't imagine them sitting around dining on gourmet salads. The average Athenian diet was heavy on bread, figs, and the aforementioned olives, with meat being a rare luxury. If you were lucky enough to afford fish, you were practically dining like a demigod. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the distinct lack of them in the sanitation department. Ancient Greece was many things, but a pioneer in public hygiene was not one of them. The closest thing they had to a sanitation system was a bit of water trickling through the streets. Public toilets, or latrines, were a thing, but privacy was not. Picture communal benches with strategically placed holes, essentially the ancient equivalent of a group text, but with more natural participation. And let's not even get started on waste disposal. Suffice to say, it was a DIY affair, and not in a Pinterest kind of way. Despite these less-than-glamorous realities, the Greeks managed to create a vibrant urban life, with streets thrumming with a mix of citizens, slaves, and traders. And speaking of citizens, it's worth noting that the Athenian population was a complex tapestry of free men, women, and slaves. Only Athenian-born males had the privilege of voting or owning property. Women, meanwhile, were expected to manage the household, their influence often confined behind closed doors. In the grand theatre of Greek democracy, they were more like stager hands than leading actors. Slavery, too, was an accepted part of ancient Greek society. Slaves performed a variety of roles, from household servants to skilled craftsmen. They were often captured enemies or purchased from markets, and while some managed to earn their freedom, many lived their entire lives in servitude. The uncomfortable truth is that much of what we admire about ancient Greece was built on the backs of those who had little choice in the matter. Yet, in this social patchwork, the Greeks found a way to thrive. The agora wasn't just a marketplace. It was a hub of ideas and innovation, where minds met and sparks flew. Philosophers like Socrates and Plato wandered these spaces, engaging in debates that would lay the groundwork for Western thought. Just imagine the philosophical banter over a cup of watered-down wine, the kind that would make a modern sommelier weep. And while the Parthenon stood as the pinnacle of architectural achievement, its influence radiated through Athenian life. It served as a constant, looming reminder of the city's glory, even as everyday Athenians navigated the complexities of their social fabric. The theater, too, was more than mere entertainment. It was a reflection of society's values, fears, and aspirations, a narrative woven with threads of comedy and tragedy that mirrored the human condition. Economically, these architectural masterpieces were both a boon and a burden. The influx of tourists and pilgrims brought business to local merchants, but maintaining such grand structures required a constant stream of resources and manpower. The temples and theaters were symbols of wealth and power, yet they also highlighted the disparities within society. The legacy of ancient Greece, with its towering columns and crumbling foundations, is a testament to both human ingenuity and the enduring struggle for equality. So, while the Parthenon gleamed in the sunlight, casting long shadows across the city, the real story of Athens was written in the bustling agora, in the murmured debates of philosophers, and in the daily grind of its citizens. It was a tale of ambition, innovation, and the eternal quest for balance between beauty and practicality. In the end, ancient Greece was a place where imagination soared alongside stark realities, where the divine danced with the mundane. And as we look back through the lens of history, we see a society that, for all its flaws, laid the foundations for much of what we hold dear today. The lessons of ancient Greece remind us that behind every marble column is a story of triumph and toil, a reminder that even the most splendid facades are supported by the hands of those who dared to dream beyond their means. And so we find ourselves at the crossroads of ancient splendor and modern admiration. The Greeks, with their penchant for marble and a flair for the dramatic, left us a legacy that has been recycled more times than politicians' campaign promises. The blueprint of their architectural genius, from the Parthenon to the theater at Epidaurus, has been photocopied across centuries and continents, each iteration a testament to their enduring allure. Let's start with those columns, the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian orders, which have strutted their stuff across the architectural catwalk for millennia. The Doric order, with its no-nonsense, sturdy style, is like the architectural equivalent of a sensible pair of shoes, reliable and timeless. You can spot Doric columns holding up everything from the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., to the British Museum in London. These columns have supported both literal roofs and metaphorical ideals, embodying strength and democracy. Then there's the Ionic order, with its scroll-like volutes, offering a more graceful alternative. It's the architectural equivalent of slipping on a tuxedo, elegant, but with a touch of flair. The Ionic columns have graced the facades of buildings from the Jefferson Memorial to university libraries worldwide, suggesting wisdom and learning. Finally, the Corinthian order, the architectural equivalent of a peacock in full plume, with its ornate capitals adorned with acanthus leaves, whispers luxury and grandeur. Think of the Pantheon in Rome, where Corinthian columns have been wowing visitors since Hadrian was emperor. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of these designs. The reality is that the ancient Greeks were not just artists, they were also shrewd economists. The use of columns wasn't merely for show, it was a practical solution to the engineering challenges of the day. The Greeks understood that these designs distributed weight effectively, allowing for larger interior spaces without the need for excessive materials. It was a masterstroke of function meeting form, a lesson in architecture that has been copied and adapted throughout history. Now, while the Greeks were busy setting architectural trends, they were also laying the groundwork for the socio-political infrastructure of the modern world. The concepts of democracy and civic engagement that flourished in the shadow of their temples have echoed through history, influencing everything from the drafting of the Magna Carta to the formation of the United Nations. The Parthenon, with its ties to political power and public life, served as a symbol of these ideals, even as it was a product of its time, built on the backs of a society rife with inequality. Speaking of legacies, let's talk about how these ancient ideas were resurrected during the Renaissance. The period when Europeans collectively decided they wanted to party like it was 499 BC. During this cultural rebirth, architects like Palladio looked to the Greeks for inspiration, integrating classical elements into their designs. This neoclassical revival wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a way of reconnecting with what they saw as the purity and rationality of ancient thought. It was the ultimate throwback Thursday, except it lasted for centuries and left us with some pretty swanky buildings. Fast forward to the 18th and 19th centuries, and you'll find Greek revival architecture sweeping across the United States and Europe. It was as though everyone suddenly remembered their Greek ancestry and decided to show it off with new temples to commerce and governance. From the columns of Wall Street's Federal Hall to the elegant facades of plantation homes in the American South, Greek architectural elements became synonymous with power and prestige. These columns weren't just holding up roofs. They were holding up ideals of democracy and enlightenment, even if the societies building them were still grappling with their own contradictions. But here's the kicker. While we're busy cooing over these marble marvels, it's crucial to remember the less glamorous truths lurking beneath their polished surfaces. The Greeks, for all their contributions to art and politics, were a society built on inequality, with deep-seated divisions between citizens and non-citizens, men and women, slave and free. Their architectural achievements were as much about asserting dominance as they were about celebrating beauty and reason. So, what keeps us coming back to these ancient designs, reimagining them in every new era? Part of it is the undeniable beauty of Greek architecture, a universal language of form and function that speaks to our innate desire for order and harmony. But another part is the mythology we've built around these structures, the stories of gods and heroes, philosophers and statesmen that continue to captivate our imaginations. It's a heady mix of romance and reality, the kind of narrative that keeps us enthralled, even as we unearth the gritty truths of the past. And let's not overlook the irony that, while the Greeks were pioneering democracy and philosophy, they were also laying the groundwork for the very systems of power and exclusion that will be challenged by future generations. Their temples and theaters stand as monuments to human creativity and endurance, but also as reminders of the complexities and contradictions inherent in any society. As we wrap up our journey through ancient Greece, we're left with a legacy that's both magnificent and messy, a testament to human ingenuity and imperfection. The columns of the Parthenon may be cracked and weathered, but their presence is still felt in the architecture of today, a reminder that while civilizations may rise and fall, the ideas and structures they leave behind can endure, inspiring and challenging us long after the last stone has been laid. In the end, legacy of Greek architecture is a story of echoes of grandeur and hubris, of innovation and inequality. It's a narrative that invites us to look beyond the marble facades and see the people who walked among them, to understand not just how they built their temples and theaters, but why. And as we step back from these ancient wonders, perhaps we see our own reflection, a reminder that history is not only what we inherit, but what we choose to create from it. So, here's to the Greeks, the original architects of our dreams and dilemmas, forever shaping the skyline of human progress.